Pouring money into fossil fuels.
Right.
It could be carbon sequestration, it could be fuel rebates, could be anything. Hundreds of billions of dollars getting ashed while we ash the planet on fossil fuel subsidies. Because we haven't had that renewable electricity, we haven't had that green hydrogen, it's kind of been pushed down. It's all sorts of excuses. Oh, it'll never be commercial, it'll never be supplied in the quantities we needed, blah, blah, blah. Now we know, let's take action. It's practical, it's implementable, let's do it now.
Okay, if we do it now, is there going to be a shock to the energy system? Is there going to be a shock actually to economically? And is it worth, not talking about transition, just going from A to B?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. A to B is the solution. Let fossil fuels do what fossil fuels do. Just burn their coal, burn their oil, burn the gas. At least they're pumping up carbon and methane into the atmosphere, honestly. Well, not that honest because they don't measure methane, which is 90 times worse than carbon. But at least the carbon is being done honestly. Encourage the green hydrogen sector to come in really fast. Okay, it's there. There's renewable power all over the world. We now know how to make electrolyzers much cheaper, like 25% of the original cost. We know how to do that now. We don't have an excuse to get into it.
Does it need to be cheaper than oil and fossil fuel for it to be viable worldwide?
Well, right now it is. Okay, so let's just swallow that bit of financial data. Right now it is cheaper, and it's getting more cheap. It's the only fuel
Mr. Forster,
which is declining in value.
You don't have enough of it, right, to power the world?
Yes, that's only because we haven't had policies to support it. If we had policies to support it 5-10 years ago, it would be everywhere. You'd see the global warming budget start to come down. Now, we've got 5 or 10 years to make a huge difference. I need policy leaders all over the world to appreciate now, okay, big business is transacting with green hydrogen in multi-billion-dollar agreements. We now know it's here and it's here to stay. Let's spread it everywhere.
Coming up on the program, the hydrogen revolution. We'll speak with the CEO of Italian utility firm Snam about his new book and why he thinks green hydrogen will be competitive in just 5 years. Plus, how are airlines working to become more sustainable? We'll look at how Airbus plans to step up in the climate fight. This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's World Headquarters in New York, I'm Kayleigh Lines, and this is Bloomberg Green. What will the world look like in 2050? Will global temperatures have stabilized, electric vehicles be abundant, and solar and wind power homes around the world? According to Marco Alvera, the CEO of Italian energy company Snam, that vision of the future could be a reality. And he says that hydrogen will pave its way. As he tells it in his new book, The Hydrogen Revolution, Alvera's moment of reckoning came in November 2018 when he tasked the Snam Scenarios team with studying how Europe could reduce its CO2 emissions to zero by 2050. Looking through the results of the study, Alvera said he was struck by how much hydrogen was in Europe's energy mix by that year. Beyond the abundance of hydrogen, the SNAM model also predicted that it would be the cheapest form of decarbonized energy for many sectors, and that it could be cheaper than today's prices for oil, coal, and nuclear power. Our Maria Tadeo spoke with Alvera at COP26.
It's happening all very fast. We see the cost of hydrogen coming down a lot. Hydrogen will play a big role in the energy mix. I don't know if it's going to be 15 or 25% of a fully decarbonized energy system, but it's going to be big. Costs are coming down, and people are waking up to the fact that it's the only way to decarbonize certain sectors, so-called hard-to-abate sectors.
And you say it's the only way and the costs are coming down. Where do you see prices moving? Because a lot of the reticence at times has to do with the pricing, that some argue, well, it's still not the cheapest option on the market.
So when I was first working in hydrogen in 2004, it was costing $1,000 per megawatt hour. 2010, 600. Today, 100, and we see it going down to 50 in 5 years' time, and to going down to $25 per megawatt hour in the next 10 years or so, which is a quarter of where it is today. That's really because renewable energy, and we're talking green hydrogen here, renewable energy costs are falling, but the cost of making the electrolyzer, which is the kit that you use to convert solar or wind energy and water into hydrogen, the cost of this kit is falling a lot because it doesn't really exist on an industrial scale. So as we build up capacity, we industrialize it, we standardize it, and we squeeze costs out. That's really the cost trajectory.
And for that, of course, you need demand, however, for governments and also institutions to kind of buy into this idea that it is the future and we want to invest and create infrastructure. What are they telling you? When you speak to governments, when you speak to officials, are they keen on this?
They're very keen. So the Department of Energy shares our view in the States of getting to below $1 a kilo, which is $25 a megawatt hour. The European Union has a hydrogen strategy, which is very clear, and several member states have the same. Chile wants to export a lot of hydrogen. China's big on hydrogen. Australia's very big on hydrogen. Japan is blending already hydrogen. So I would say the world is now really focused on this because it's the only way to store energy for a long period of time economically is to convert it into either a liquid or a gas.
And of course, you talk about the price, but the other big component is the volume. You know, how big can you go? Where do you see that on a time scale?
So wherever it's sunny or windy, you can produce very cheap hydrogen eventually. And so compared to oil and gas, which are concentrated in few parts of the world, it's going to be very democratic from that point of view. So every sunny place, every desert, every ocean wind can be turned into hydrogen that we can put on ships, in pipes, and really start trading it around the world. So it's going to happen a lot faster than a lot of people think.
So, and when you say a lot faster, what is that in time?
As I said, $50, which is essentially oil parity within 5 years. And then, depending on how quickly we ramp it up after that, we could get to $25, which is coal parity before the end of the decade.
And in big scale.
In big scale, because once you get to coal parity, that's the only way we're going to get China and India to stop burning new coal. We have businesses in China and in India, and I see a lot of hydrogen development, a lot of renewable development in both countries. The India announcement was incredibly strong on 2030. Some people were upset about the 2017 net zero deadline, but when it comes to 30, he announced a big commitment to get to 50% renewables.
Were you surprised by it?
I was surprised that they would make it so explicit, and even the net zero is a big thing for them. And so I think it will happen faster than 2070 because of the falling cost of renewable and hydrogen. India's burning 80 gigawatt of oil, of diesel, to keep the lights on. So there's an immediate opportunity there, and we're very interested in working in that country.
And with regards to China, perhaps the fact that we haven't really seen them active, I guess the diplomats are working on this, but we haven't really seen the leadership.
It's going to be technology, it's going to be industry. I think China has committed to a net zero, which is very important. At the G20, China was clearly behind the 1.5 degrees. So I think a lot has been achieved between the G20 and COP, and I think what's really important is to see in the coming years how quick it's in our hands to make part of this happen in 5 years, or it could otherwise happen in 15, 20 years. It's about building the project. The capital is there. We saw how many trillions of dollars are already committed. What's missing is really the projects, and that's where companies like us step in.
Marco Alvera, CEO of SNAM there, speaking with our Maria Tadeo. Let's turn now to the aviation industry. It's a big contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions, and it's under pressure to change that. In October, the International Air Transport Association, a trade body representing airlines, approved a target of achieving net zero emissions by 2050. To achieve that, many airlines in the US and Europe are looking to buy sustainable aviation fuel made from renewable sources like used vegetable oil. Initiatives like these are pushing plane makers to come up with some radical new aircraft that will eventually cater to our growing appetite for travel without hurting the environment. We took a look at how Airbus, the world's #2 aircraft manufacturer, is stepping up to the challenge.
How long until we can fly emission-free? Airbus says it's more confident by the day it can be done by its 2035 target. Airbus's CEO spoke about its ambitions for hydrogen-powered planes at the company's summit in France.
The physics works. Hydrogen technologies are not new. They are used in other sectors. We use them in space on our rockets, and we don't need the laws of physics to change to be able to use hydrogen on our planes. So every day we become more confident, but we think we need to have a plane, we need to have the right fuels, the hydrogen available in the right quantity at the right place at the right time, and we need the regulations to be ready. So we really need the work and the collaboration of many people around the globe to make it happen on time.
But it could be a long wait until green passenger jets go mainstream. Larger aircraft with more than 150 seats are not expected to feature globally until about 2050. That means manufacturers and airlines today are under growing pressure to ramp up short-term innovations to cut their carbon. In the long term, meeting the ambitious plans for so-called green hydrogen means building a giant industry almost from scratch. To make that happen, British airline EasyJet is among those saying governments need to get involved and fast. Aviation's emissions over the last 3 decades leading up to the pandemic grew by about 80% to over 1 gigaton, and that's projected to double by 2050. According to Bloomberg NEF, about half of the airlines with the largest global market share have set net zero targets by that same date, nearly 3 decades away.
Coming up, from blue sky projects to the bottom line. We'll speak with our Bloomberg NEF expert Meredith Annex and dig into their models about how hydrogen fits into the future energy mix. This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York, I'm Kaylee Lyons, and this is Bloomberg Green. Now let's bring in Meredith Annex, our Bloomberg NEF hydrogen specialist, to talk more about how hydrogen could change the energy landscape. So Meredith, what place do you think hydrogen is likely to have in the future energy mix globally?
Hydrogen's this incredible solution for us as we look to decarbonize because it's a perfect solution in areas that are hard to electrify. So where we like to think about hydrogen playing a role, it's in things like heavy industry, especially where you need a feedstock as well as energy source, and in things like dispatchable power, long-haul transport, maybe even shipping and aviation.
That sounds great that it can be used for such diverse industries. At the end of the day, though, how much is this going to cost?
Well, that's the amazing thing about hydrogen, because depending on how you make it, it can actually see significant cost declines in the future. So when we're talking about clean hydrogen, we usually mean green hydrogen produced from renewable electricity. And in that case, your hydrogen is almost as cheap as the renewables that are used to make it. So if you're in a place with really good renewable resources, you'll be able to have cheaper hydrogen. But even in places with less good resources, we think that hydrogen can be cheaper than $1 per kilogram, which is the price of unabated hydrogen today, and around $8 per million BTUs for those who prefer to think in energy units. And that can be achieved anywhere in the world by 2050, we believe.
All right, so let's talk about kind of the pros and cons list. I don't know where cost fits into that, but what are the advantages to hydrogen over other renewables, and then what are the drawbacks?
Yeah, main advantage is the fact that hydrogen can serve roles that electrons struggle with. And that's things like seasonal storage, for instance, or just anything where you need storability, where electrons are harder to store, hydrogen is going to be easier. That also leads to a downside, though, because hydrogen is less energy dense than the usual things that we use for storable energy today, like coal or oil or natural gas. So you will need more volume of storage to handle the same amount of energy.
Let's talk about the viability as well and how it may differ in different geographies. What is your view on that?
Yeah, so for green hydrogen, again, from renewable electricity, really places with the best renewable resources, things like Latin America or the Middle East, even Southern Europe, have really, really good potential for producing hydrogen. And then when you're looking at blue hydrogen, which is produced from natural gas or coal with carbon capture and storage, we do see that becoming more expensive than green hydrogen in the future, especially as renewable electricity costs come down. But that can be a viable option in places like the US Gulf Coast or Russia, where you've got good geological storage for the carbon, as well as ample natural gas that's quite cheap.
All right, great breakdown. Thank you so much to our Meredith Annex, our Bloomberg NEF hydrogen specialist. And of course, you can get more from the Bloomberg NEF team on the terminal and online. And they've recently done a podcast called Hydrogen 101 as part of its Switched On series. So from iron ore titans pivoting to cleaner energy to talk of a hydrogen revolution, that's it from this week's edition of Bloomberg Green. We'll be back next week with a deep dive into the state of electric vehicles. And you can keep the conversation going by following us on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter @Climate. I'm Kaylee Lyons from Bloomberg's World Headquarters in New York, and this is Bloomberg Green.
The great sci-fi art of the mid-20th century teased a vision of the future with one distinct element in common: a life for humans in outer space. Whether vacationing on an exotic new planet or commuting to the moon for business, space travel seemed like it was just around the corner. Yet here we are, a half-century later, and only about 500 human beings have ever left the bounds of Earth's atmosphere. But thanks to a set of ambitious private companies betting on the promise of space tourism, that long-awaited future could be here sooner than we think. For most of the history of spaceflight, governments have been the prime force behind nearly every aspect, from planning to funding to crew selection. But as early as the 1980s, proposals for commercial space tourism began to emerge, along with innovative solutions for getting people there, such as the wild concept of sticking a 74-person passenger cabin in the cargo bay of a NASA space shuttle. Although various non-astronauts have been selected for missions over the years, true space tourism didn't happen until 2001, when an entrepreneur named Dennis Tito coughed up an estimated $20 million to hitch a ride with the Russian Federal Space Agency for a week-long vacation aboard the International Space Station. 20 years later, we're seeing a new contender in this final frontier of tourism: private companies.
It's becoming a private enterprise situation. Still very high risk with a high reward, potential reward. But, government is really out of the business of flying people now, and it's really going to be companies like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson that do that heavy lifting. Commercial space tourism is usually about taking the non-astronaut, the private citizen, into an orbital or suborbital flight. So you get a short amount of microgravity experience, and you can float and take some photos. And then you come back. This was something that technology had gotten to a point where the private sector was going to make a business out of this. There are multiple companies that want to get to the place where they fly people into space.
The first of these is Blue Origin, founded in 2000 by Jeff Bezos. Using the autonomous rocket system New Shepard, a tribute to the first American in space, Blue Origin plans to launch up to 6 passengers at a time, offering a rarefied treat of 62-mile-high views and a momentary experience of weightlessness. Booking officially kicked off in May 2021, with the very first seat to be auctioned off for charity. Meanwhile, Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic has also been pursuing a viable form of suborbital tourism, aiming for a launch in 2022 once Sir Richard himself has taken a flight.
I'm hoping to be able to go to space. I'd love to be able to coincide it with the moon landing and go to space. So I've got the whip on the team, and we'll see how we go.
The company claims to have lined up over 600 seat reservations so far, including Justin Bieber and Leonardo DiCaprio. Virgin has projected that the final cost of the ticket will be at least $250,000, or roughly $50,000 for each of the 5 minutes or so of weightlessness that you'll get to experience. Although costly, both companies' offerings aim to make suborbital flight a regular form of adventure travel, eventually driving down costs at scale to expand the customer base beyond the orbit of celebrities and billionaires. The third major contender is Elon Musk's SpaceX, which has set its sights even higher on orbital flights, which are
a whole nother level of complexity and energy and danger. When you go suborbital, if you're just going to go up above the von Karman line, which is 100 kilometers or about 62 miles, you only need to get up to maybe 5,000 miles an hour to get up there, and you go basically straight up and then straight back down. You don't have the reentry heating that you would see coming in from an orbital. So when you go orbital, I don't care if you're a baseball or a battleship, you've got to go 17,500 miles per hour, not just 5,000 miles an hour. The energies involved are much greater. By doing that, SpaceX has gone another level up, and that's what they're doing with the Inspiration 4.
Visit inspiration4.com for your chance to go to space.
Inspiration 4 is the first planned all-civilian mission into orbit, slated to launch in late 2021. The crew will bring their own set of diverse perspectives and backgrounds and experiences to test how a group of different people, namely people who aren't professional astronauts, could fare in space.
Until now, astronauts have had to be physically perfect, and this mission is changing that. And so I feel incredibly honored to be representing those who aren't physically perfect. At age 10, I was diagnosed with bone cancer, and I was treated at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. And I spent a year there undergoing intense chemo and also surgery that ultimately saved my leg. I now work at St. Jude as a PA, a physician assistant, and I work with leukemia and lymphoma patients. The kids we work with are so brave, and they are very excited to watch me go to space because this is showing them that, they're capable of doing this as well.
Haley, along with 3 other crew members, will spend 3 days in space, orbiting the Earth every 90 minutes before landing back off the coast of Florida.
Well, when you think about access, the first astronauts for the United States came from the test pilot side. And so women weren't allowed to be a part of that. We have somebody in their 20s, somebody in their 30s, somebody in their 40s, and somebody in their 50s. And so there can be access in all kinds of ways, whether you're talking about age, whether you're talking about gender, whether you're talking about race and ethnicity, and all of those things.
The first time, people are going up into space and not sent there by a superpower like the United States or Russia or China. Well, that's really significant. And you've got to be very thoughtful about it. The whole game plan right now is to make space really affordable and accessible for everybody, so that you can have fishing buddies going to space someday. But the first is special, and so with that, we wanted to have a crew selection process that could make space available to everyday people.
Getting to space is only the first step for space tourism. The next challenge is what to do and where to stay when you get there. Axiom Space is planning to launch the first segment of a new commercial space station in 2024. Their $2 billion project, called Ax Station, will become the first free-flying private international space station. Or, to use a more consumer-friendly term, a space hotel. Axiom isn't the only company out to make your space stay a little more comfortable. Bigelow Aerospace has been building what they call expandable habitat technology, like their B330, an inflatable pod module that expands once in orbit.
There's even one attached to the International Space Station right now they've been testing. And you take it up, and it's rather small, and then you inflate it, and it seems to be working very, very well. This is likely to be the first kind of tourist hotel that you're going to see up in space. First of all, it's easier to carry instead of this giant tin can with all of that. The inflatables are lighter. You just blow them up, and they get a nice big size for about less than half the weight probably.
But even as space missions become accessible to civilians,
the risks of going into space are incredibly high. And you could die 1,000 ways that we can think of and 1,000 other ways that we can't think of.
This is Michelle Hanlon. She's a space lawyer at the Mississippi School of Law, focused on protecting humans in outer space.
Now, I'm not an attorney for any of the space tourists, so I haven't been privy to their private contracts. But I can tell you that the FAA requires certain waivers to be in those contracts. So, for example, the FAA says, well, we're not going to make you make your spacecraft to a certain safety level. We are going to make you, spacecraft operator, make sure that you inform your space tourists of all of the hazards that you know of. I'd imagine a very long waiver, all the ways you can die in space. And you have to understand that there's health risks, and you have to indemnify the US government if you are launching from the United States. So those are things that we know a space tourist has to sign and has to waive. So now let's go back and think about our space flight participants. The FAA calls space tourists space flight participants. They don't call them astronauts. Why is that important? If you're not an astronaut, there's no obligation to rescue you if something goes wrong. It's a lot of money to set up a rescue launch. If it can even be done, it's something really important to think about, and that difference as we cross this threshold from having astronauts in space to having real people like me in space.
And when we are able to make it to space reliably enough, there's still a host of other legal and ethical issues to consider before space tourism can truly take off.
There are so many gaps in space law that we are going to have to put in a lot of sort of basement ideas. And so, for example, the Outer Space Treaty is a treaty that offers principles and guidelines for state activities, for the activities of national governments. It doesn't talk about private entities, it doesn't talk about humans in space. So now if something goes wrong, so let's think about all the times hotels on Earth are sued, right? So slip and falls, you step on something in the bathroom, you sue the hotel, and it becomes a private lawsuit. because of the vagaries of international law, if something happens in space, well, boy, you can sue the state that launched your spacecraft, you can sue the company that brought you there, you can sue the hotel, you can sue the individual, you can sue every government related to that, because the way the Outer Space Treaty and the Outer Space Regime have set this up is that anything that happens in space first has to go through a diplomatic channel before you think about suing in a court of law. And so every single slip and fall in a space hotel is a diplomatic nightmare. And so we really need to figure that out before we start sending a lot of people there. You think about human rights in space. Here, we don't think about a human right to oxygen because it's kind of all around us and free. It's not in a space hotel. So what happens if something happens and the oxygen depletes? Who gets the oxygen first? And then, of course, let's not even think about the labor. How do you treat your labor in a space hotel where that person may be there for 2 or 3 years without coming back to Earth? So a lot of things to think about.
Space habitats are more likely in the near future to focus on research missions and be a home for experiments that can't happen as easily back on Earth.
Space hotels, I think they garner a lot of headlines and a lot of news, but at the same time, that's not the first thing that you're going to see happen. They don't offer the compelling business case, I think, that you'll see from a place that wants to manufacture pharmaceuticals or a new type of crystal or some type of filament or fiber optic cables and other things that you can do in microgravity. The things that are actually, a high value finished good, when you get that back to Earth and you sell it for a very, very huge profit margin, that's what's likely to happen in space, as opposed to having a real estate platform that you sell to a tourist. A space hotel is really interesting, and it will probably happen, but it's not likely to be at the forefront of space commerce.
Even if space hotels are right around the corner, don't get too excited about booking a trip in one.
It's not a cheap ticket to ride to space, and it's going to be, millionaires and billionaires and that sort. But at the same time, the point was made that in the early days of airline trips, that was also a completely unaffordable ticket for most people. Those people who flew were people of means, and over time it becomes affordable to the masses. And I think that's the goal for all the entrepreneurs in space as well, to get those costs down to a point where it's not $10 million or $5 million or $300,000 ride into suborbital space. When it becomes more like buying a first-class ticket to go to Europe from the United States. So that's the goal, and the question is, can we get to that point?
Given the immense operating costs of getting to space, it may be years, if ever, until space tourism becomes a profitable venture for any of these companies. Virgin Galactic, the only publicly traded company of the three, has had a particularly rocky year, initially riding on the momentum of a SPAC deal, but more recently beset by launch delays and major funders, including Branson himself, selling large quantities of their stock in the company.
Space is really, really, really hard, and it's an absolute cliche, but it's one that happens to be very true. It's just really hard to do. That's also the reason that you've seen the delays that, Virgin had talked about flying years and years ago. And it became such a crazy point that Richard Branson actually stopped talking about it when he was asked, because it was never going to be when he predicted. But it's not insurmountable. And, investors have stepped up because this is something that is doable.
Despite the astronomical dangers and costs of getting to space, it may ultimately follow the course of other once fanciful modes of travel.
Wright brothers having, what was by modern standards a very unimpressive first flight, at Kitty Hawk. I mean, you had less than 20 years later, you had your first airborne ambulances being used to save lives. Fundamentally, the world is a more interesting place when people can go and dance among the stars and such.
The lure of space is innate. It's in our DNA. It's that exploration bug. We are an exploratory species, and we want to go out there and see what's out there.
That vision that I had in 1969 of seeing normal human beings travel into space, it's finally beginning to happen. When you get a bunch of people up there and they can all see it for themselves, that'll create even yet another revolution in how we treat our planet and the way we think about it.
So while 2001 came and went without quite looking like Stanley Kubrick's ultimate space fantasy, 2021 might finally be the year we're catching up.
If you visit California, you might be inclined to go to Disneyland, or jump in your convertible and take Highway 1 up the coast, or maybe make a pilgrimage to Yosemite. All very fine choices. But if you're the kind of person who revels in our planet's extremes, then it's Route 395 that you're after. This one glorious road will carry you from Death Valley's desert floor to sky-high views of Mount Whitney. You can see the 5,000-year-old bristlecone pines, the oldest living organisms. Or the bizarre tufa towers of Mono Lake. And true to California's boom and bust spirit, you can saunter around the ghost town of Bodie. What a novel experience to find an empty American city where all the businesses are shut down. To do 395 upright, it helps to have a guide, and mine is a man named Jan. And his crew, Heron,
Let's tidy up first.
and Lemmy, the hardest partying dog of all time. Jan agreed to show me some of what 395 has to offer, but only if we agreed not to disclose any locations.
My name is Jan Swirstra. I'm an industrial designer out of LA, and I spend a lot of time camping and a lot of time in the Eastern Sierra. It's a place I love, and sometimes I'm known as 395 North because my Instagram account, and I don't like to be known as that, but I'm trying to use it to set a good example and do more with it than just social media.
Where did we end up camping? We got here late last night. I wasn't even sure where we are.
This is BLM land, right on the outskirts of National Forest. And it's one of my favorite places in the world. Basically, everything outdoors wrapped into one.
Yeah. Good thing about California, man.
Oh, man. We have so much national forest and public land that you can literally just cruise out and find a place to camp. It's ours.
What I wish was mine is Jan's sweet truck.
It's a 2019 Ford Ranger. Has about 200 watts of solar in it and a fridge, and has everything that an RV has except for a toilet, but just on a smaller, simple scale.
And you drive us around day to day in LA.
Yep.
And then just roll out when you want.
It's my daily driver. Handles great. And then when I'm done with work, I can just bail and go camping. So the camper basically has only what I need. Think of it as backpacking with a car.
Yeah.
The fridge has a couple compartments. This is just a kitchen box, stove, utensils, and a bunch of stuff. This one has just dry food. Then when you get inside, there's a bed. The bed flips up, so you've got tons of room in here. This awning is phenomenal. If you want to pull that over. That's cool. Let me just pop that up.
Sorted.
So, home on wheels.
Yeah.
This is my vacation house.
Dude, it's so nice, man. Even with his nomad lifestyle, Jan faces the same big question as the rest of us. Do the internet and smartphones have to ruin everything?
When you find the super special, beautiful spots, is that you busting out a map and like looking where it might be cool to go, or is it word of mouth and just getting to know people, the locals? And
if I see a dirt road, I just want to go down it. So a lot of it's just aimless rambling. It's a desire to just see something. Check that out. For some reason, it's more fulfilling than getting a recommendation from somebody. Or there's tons of apps and websites now, road trip apps, camping apps. They've proliferated. The knowledge is accessible on the internet, right? I used to fight the geotags, and I would get really pissed off. Like, why are you posting this place? It's gonna blow up, it's gonna get trashed. Now I've realized that you can't fight it. The internet has just shrunk the world. So we're not gonna stop it. We're not gonna stop people from going there. So I'm a lot more focused in conversation now with trying to set a good example. When you go, pick up your trash. When you're pooping out in the wilderness, don't leave your toilet paper on the top. Make sure you follow, good steps for leaving no trace.
As a thank you for this quick guide to pooping etiquette, we made Jan, Heron, and Lemmy some tacos. And we all took in the night sky and knocked back a couple of drinks. Take that, Apocalypse. The thing about good times and serenity in 2020 is that they're fleeting at best. After we split up from Jan and continued on our way, smoke started to envelop us. The plus side was that our RV no longer smelled like feet. The downside was breathing. My man David here suggested that we try and outflank the smoke by cutting through Yosemite. Without a reservation, we had to talk our way in.
Yes, no stopping, no getting out, and don't go in the valley. Yeah, no problem. We just wanted to get through.
It was a beautiful choice. Glad we got out of the smoke. Whoa, okay. But not quite as effective as we had hoped.
Fast forward 4 hours or so, and we had managed to trade the smoky majesty of Yosemite for the smoky,
Look at it.
strip malls of the Central Valley.
We have made it sort of out of the smoke all the way across Yosemite National Park and here to the gorgeous Central Valley of California. We're off to see a kind of surprising tech startup that is making some pretty strange machines to serve all the growers out in this region. And so we're here in this near Fresno. This is California farm country, right?
We're just south of Fresno, a town called Kingsburg. So we're right in the Central Valley of California. Very, very large farming valley here. It's kind of considered the breadbasket of the world.
The Central Valley stretches out over about 20,000 square miles, and the farmers here produce about 1/4 of the food that Americans eat, including a whole lot of fruits and nuts.
Tell me a little bit of the background of Gus. I know some of this is like a family business. The roots of this go back a ways. Tell me kind of like how we got to what's essentially like a startup, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. So the founder of our company is Dave Crinklaw, and he started the business back in 1982. He started with with his dad, was commercial spraying of trees and vineyards. Got to the point where our biggest challenge was labor, just the shortage of it, really. He was forced into innovating, and he had this idea for quite some time about doing a driverless sprayer, and it finally got to the point where he said, you know what, I either got to get out of this business or I'm going to innovate.
Organic or not, crops need to be sprayed, and this process has to take place a few times a year. This means hiring a lot of people to work long hours under serious pressure. And so, just like the tech bros to the north, Gus decided to solve all of its problems with robots.
On this like labor point, you guys have set this up where you can have somebody in a truck and that one person can monitor, I think, like 8 of these.
In order to operate Gus, you have one guy or girl that sits in a pickup and they monitor from a laptop computer. So that person is basically just watching all the vehicles on the screen. They can monitor up to 8 of them at a time while they're out there spraying in the orchard. And so that user interface really provides them with all the information they need to make sure that the machines are safe and that they're doing the correct job. So it tells them what speed they're driving, the engine RPM, the amount of gallonage per acre that they're applying at any given time. So if any one of the machines has an issue, it's going to send an alert to that laptop.
Much like a self-driving car, these beasts use GPS, LiDAR, and cameras to see and navigate the world around them. They also rely on pre-built maps of the orchards for extra guidance. Gus builds the machines right here, and then takes them out for robot training on this orchard next door. It's here that the company learns if the machines will behave and do as their software and human masters command.
So this is kind of like this is a test orchard where you guys put it through the paces and work on the technology?
Yeah, so this is our test orchard right here. It's right by our building, as you can see in the background. So every new machine, as it comes off the assembly line, it's put through a commissioning test right here. We test all the sensors on the machine, autonomous computer, all the safety systems, make sure it's doing what it's doing prior to when it's delivered to a customer.
So what's it doing now?
So right now he's doing a test spray. So he's just turning the water on to make sure that the system comes up to pressure, spraying water out of the nozzles just to make sure it's all functioning properly.
Okay. It's got like a crazy turbine at the back, or?
Yeah, so it's basically just a big fan.
Okay.
And that fan's driven off of the Cummins diesel motor, and it just basically creates a big airflow.
Gus is already selling these vehicles to brave modern farmers. and people the world over have taken notice of its machines.
And have you just sold them in the Central Valley or like throughout the U.S. or even overseas, or where are they going?
Yeah, so right now the majority of our machines are here in California in the Central Valley. However, we do have machines and customers in Florida, in the citrus industry over there, as well as Australia.
And I think you started selling them in like December of 2019.
Yeah, so we started taking orders early last year for the sprayers, and the first deliveries we made were in December of 2019.
Okay,
so.
And how much do they cost each?
So our retail price on these machines is $285,000.
So it's not a small investment, but I'm sure the regular sprayers aren't cheap.
Yeah,
either.
I mean, we're honestly not too far away from conventional equipment on our price, and the main thing is that the return on investment is very quick due to all the labor savings and the increased efficiency. I mean, these machines, they just thrive. But basically what we're doing, besides this machine, this is our first machine. We call it Orchard Gus, mainly designed for your nut trees, as well as citrus and fruit. In the future, we're working on a few other projects. We're going to do more machines. One of them is actually a vineyard sprayer. So vineyards are much tighter spacing, so the machine has to be physically smaller. And then we've got our eyes on doing a lot of other innovating.
That right there, friends, is a Central Valley farmer putting his whole fruit basket on the table. Gary's TED Talk can't be far off. And with that, it was time to get back in the RV and to confront what happens when three men are bested by their own failings and the forces of entropy. Next on Hello World, we cruise into the Mojave Desert in search of a lunar lander.
We have instruments that we are going to deliver to the South Pole of the Moon in December of 2022. Instruments that are trying to scan the surface of the moon.
And hang with a test pilot who walked away from this.
Meet Betty. She lives by herself, but for the last few months, she hasn't been alone.
LQ, tell me a joke.
Did you hear about the claustrophobic astronaut?
No.
Apparently, he just needed a little space.
Most technology isn't made for 93-year-olds. But this woman is making sure that this particular robot is.
I like you. Who are you?
She's researching the way we interact with machines. And if she has her way, robots will soon be a trusty companion for all of us.
My name is LQ. How can I help you?
As technology replaces old jobs, it's also creating new ones. I'm Aki Ito, and I'm here to show you the jobs of the future.
My name is Danielle Ishak, and I am a human-robot interaction researcher. It's really hard to intuitively design a robot meant for a consumer audience. You have to make sure that it's a robot that people want, people know how to use, and people value.
Danielle works for an Israeli startup called Intuition Robotics. Its U.S. office is here in downtown San Francisco.
Hello.
Hey Danielle, it's Aki.
Come on in.
The company is funded by a couple big names like Samsung and Toyota. Full disclosure, Bloomberg's venture capital arm is an investor too.
This is Ellie Q.
Can I take her out for a spin?
Please.
Ellie Q, tell me what you can do.
I am a proactive social robot designed for older adults. I can connect you to your family and friends, and even play music.
These features might remind you of the Amazon Echo, but you'd be missing the point if you compared her to a smart speaker. She's not meant to just be useful. She's meant to be a companion.
Why don't you take a break and have a drink?
And that's why she has a head that can nod and make other subtle gestures you might expect from a pet.
Through our research with older adults, we're finding that almost on a daily basis, we see that somebody tells her that they love her.
Really?
Or that they like her. Or that they miss
Literally,
her.
I love you?
Mm-hmm. They'll also tell her, I'm depressed, or I'm lonely. They'll open up to her in a way that they might not necessarily open up to a human because they don't feel like they'll be judged.
Ellie Q isn't on sale yet. But a prototype is already in the homes of about a dozen early testers who live in the Bay Area.
Ellie Q, tell me what the weather is today.
Danielle's job is to figure out what's working and what's not.
Sorry, please rephrase your request.
And she does that by visiting each of her testers twice a month. How important are these visits to your job?
They're critical. We're building a product for people who we are not. I'm not a senior, and how could you know how to design for somebody if you don't do research? Because otherwise, you would just be designing in the dark.
Jobs like Danielle's are just starting to emerge. Until recently, robots were mostly in factories, separated from humans. But now, they're finally getting cheap enough, small enough, and smart enough to be in our homes. This has created a whole new challenge of designing robots that people will actually want to interact with. And that's where Danielle comes in. Her research has helped shape every little facet of Ellie Q, from the way Ellie Q moves to the way she talks.
It's a very special job, and it can be really hard, and it can be really frustrating. But at the end of the day, it's incredibly rewarding. And I think the most rewarding part about it is when I see the joy on the users' faces, like that they saw their feedback turned into something real.
Today, we've driven east of San Francisco to go see one of Danielle's research participants.
Ellie Q, tell me something interesting.
Did you know that Ronald Reagan was a lifeguard in high school and saved 77 people's lives?
Now, see, this is where a conversation is. She should open up and I should say, no, I did not know that. I expect her to be able to continue a conversation for at least a couple of comments.
Yeah. And why is that?
Why?
Yeah.
Because that's companionship.
When Betty was around Danielle's age, she was working with some of history's very first computers.
When I was finishing up my master's degree, I was working at Harvard in the computer lab when they were building Mark IV. A large room-sized computer. But now, this artificial intelligence stuff is amazing. Ellie Q?
Yes?
Schedule a doctor's appointment.
No problem. I'm working on it.
When Danielle brought along the idea of working with robotics for the elderly, I said, are you kidding me? Will older people connect to a robot? And she said, I don't know, let's research and find out.
Danielle grew up here in this suburb of Atlanta. Her parents spent much of their childhoods in Israel and met in the US.
We as immigrants, we understood that we might need to work a little harder. In fact, I feel that rather than taken away from Danielle, it gave her so much more, because she understood the fact that you need to run after your dreams and work really hard, no matter what the challenges are.
School didn't come easily for Danielle.
I have dyslexia, and that very much affected my self-esteem academically.
The principal of the school did not recommend her to take advanced classes. She fought for it, and she got into it, and she did very well with them too.
Danielle's first job out of grad school was at X, the secretive research facility founded by Google. It's known for dreaming up all kinds of wacky, far-flung ideas.
Can you tell us about the moonshots you worked on?
No, I can't tell you too much about the projects that I worked on. I can say that I was working on robotics.
She loved the job, but wanted to work on something that would reach real consumers sooner. So she left X after a year and joined Intuition Robotics. She's been working in the field for 4 years now, and it took her a while to find her footing in a male-dominated industry.
I've gone to different meetups where there'll be like a circle of men with their like zip-up jacket with their like company logo on it and a beer in their hand. And I'll come in with lipstick and nobody wants to talk to me. This is my closet.
So at first she did her best to fit in, wearing a pair of glasses she didn't need and toning down her style.
So what's the kind of thing you used to wear to a conference?
Stuff like this, blousey things that make you look like you're 40.
But that got old after a while.
And what's the kind of thing you wear now?
Now it's like I just enjoy being kind of expressive and playful in what I wear.
Before we wrap up for the day, Danielle has one more LEQ tester to visit. Joseph is 97. And he's had the robot in his home for 8 months.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. How has Miss LEQ been?
She always tells me to take a drink of water at least 4 times a day.
So, we added a whole bunch of new facts to LEQ.
Did you know that a cup of chopped red bell pepper contains more vitamin C than an orange?
Okay. What did you think of that?
Certainly, the print was, I could see that quite clearly.
What about this?
I can see that. LEQ, play music.
No problem. It will begin shortly.
By 2050, almost 500 million people are going to be 80 or older. And if current trends continue, more and more are going to be like Joseph and Betty, living alone.
LEQ, stop.
Today, both of them are doing okay. But some of Danielle's other participants have been struggling.
Is it kind of hard to leave them at the end of the day?
It is. Some of our testers are pretty advanced in the stages of depression through loneliness and isolation. And at times, I know that LEQ is cheering them up in their day, but I know that it's only part of the way. No source of artificial intelligence robots will ever be able to replace humans and human companionship or human care.
The key to Danielle's work is to embrace that very limitation of machines.
Robots should help humans do what they love help humans interact with more humans, help humans in general, not pull humans away from humans, not take humans' jobs and leave humans without purpose.
Whether it's in our workplaces or in our homes, robots are soon going to be everywhere. And it's up to Danielle to make sure this robot-filled future leaves us just a little better off.
So don't be afraid. And if you are afraid, come and join us, because I promise it's a friendly place.
Times are tough. Jobs are scarce. It's risky to be outside and around others. Seems like there's very few ways to make extra money during a pandemic. So I guess I'll just hunker down and binge social media until this all blows over. Wait, don't these people make money? How do these people make money? Streamers, YouTubers, Twitch stars. How do they make money? Is it a lot? Is it a lot of work? I know, I gotta ask somebody in the biz, and I got just the guy. Austin John Plays.
This is your full-time job now, right?
As of November of last year, yes. This was always just kind of like a side thing. Like, any money that I made from doing my videos and whatever else, I never touched that because I didn't really think of that as being like real money. And then it started coming in more and more. And then it was like I hit my first day that I broke $1,000 and I was like, this is actually going to be money.
How did the YouTube channel come to be?
When the game Pokemon Sun and Moon came out for the 3DS, there was like things that I learned about the game, and then I wanted to just share that information with people. And at the time, I didn't have any way to capture a screen or anything, so I found like generic footage and I kind of put it all together with so much editing. And that video got 6 views. And then 2 days later, I made another one, and that one got 12 views. And then I just started pumping out more and more content, and people were like, this guy knows what he's talking about. It really just started building on top of itself, and then it was like, my channel really focuses on tips and tricks. So I play a straight 18 hours, and I'll finish the game or get to about the 40-hour mark, and then I'll make my first video. While I'm going through, I have a giant notepad and just scribbles everywhere, and I make these notes of like the things that stumped me, so I know the things that may stump other people.
What do you need to think about if you're building your YouTube channel?
1, you need to do something that you're passionate about. Not that you like, not that you think you're gonna make money on, something you're passionate about. The other thing is something that other people are passionate about. It holds a special place to them. And third is, it needs to be something that people are gonna seek out information on. In order to enter into the marketplace, you either need to be better than everyone else, you either need to be faster than everyone else, or you need to be more accessible than everyone else. And you can't be more accessible because it's already on the platform. Granted, if you understand how the algorithm works, which is very similar to Google Analytics, then yeah, you can have a little bit of a head start. But if you're not doing it faster, and if you're not doing it better than everyone else, then why should anyone watch your channel? So my income as a YouTuber kind of breaks down to 3 different ways. 1, which is the bulk of it, which is ad revenue. Whenever you go and you watch a video and then there's an ad and then you wait 5 seconds and you hit the bottom right corner and then you go on to the next video, or a non-skippable ad, or the video starts immediately, you get the little banner ad at the bottom, or if you scroll down from the video, the first thing that shows there is an ad. Those are the 4 different types of ads that can appear on every single YouTube video. And all of them pay a certain amount. It varies on lots of things, like the country of the person who posts it, the country of the person who watches it, the time of year, where you are in the quarter, if there's anything going on with a reduction in ad revenue. Like, great example, COVID-19, companies weren't spending as much on advertising. So because of that, CPM went down. CPM stands for click per thousand. I'm using the Roman numeral for 1,000. And that means that for every 1,000 views, you get a certain amount of money. Now, on low ads, when I first started off, my CPM was 30 cents. So every 1,000 views, I made 30 cents. But then once I signed with an MCN and I started making more quality content and more engaging content, some of my better videos and certain times of the year, I can see CPMs as high as $12 to $14. And there's a big fluctuation between, you know, if I post a video when there's no ads being spent like January and February, that's the reason a lot of your favorite YouTubers and also TV shows don't post new videos in that time of year because ad rates are down. Why are they going to make content then? Instead, you're recording and you're bulking up for when ad revenue is higher. The second way that a YouTuber makes income is support, crowdfunding, things like that. When I first started off, Patreon was really the only option, but then they started rolling out supporters and members for YouTube channels. So whenever I have a live stream, you can click a button and then you can become a member, and then you get special icons next to your name. I believe they're called badges, or on any video, you can hit the join button and that helps support the channel. And then the third aspect of that would be merch. And for me, my merch has been somewhat basic. In fact, I'm wearing one of my t-shirts from last year right now. You have to endure the times that your first video gets 6 views, that you post it on Reddit and they say, shut up, and then an auto mod bans you. You have to go through that, because until you go through that and you discover doing it for other people, you're doing it for yourself. If you're not loving what you do, then it's not worth it.
Huh. So make a channel about something that I'm passionate about. Oh, sweet. I guess I can make the channel about that. Now, how do I grow an audience? How do I get popular?
It's all about diversification, right? You have to have a massive Twitter following. You have to have a massive Instagram following. You have to have a massive YouTube following. Of course, you have to be on Twitch, which is the key platform. But basically, any way you can get in front of your audience, you can engage with your audience, is going to drive those clicks, which ultimately drives the advertiser revenue that you get back from all of these platforms.
It's me and Dan playing video games and talking in a funny manner over them.
They're not just people who are good at games, they're actually people who are good at online engagement, online entertainment, first and foremost.
You have the right to remain stylish. Anything you wear can and will be used against you in the court of fashion.
The streamer is either very, very talented at the game. The best player in the game is generally going to draw a crowd because people like watching people who are very good. On the other hand, they're either very, very good or funny, charismatic, whatever it is on that side.
Oh, no.
You know, it becomes more of a show where they talk about other things outside of the gaming world, and gaming becomes really just a backdrop and an excuse to engage with that audience.
There were those weird, like, Ronald McDonald, like, straight to VHS movies. You remember those?
I'm personable, I'm chatty. I would kind of, you know, when boring things were happening in the game, I would ramble on about, you know, movies I'd watched or books I'd read and, you know, or conversations I'd had and stuff like that. And so I think being personable was a big part of that.
It's not just getting on and playing games. It's getting on and being an entertainer. You are putting on a show.
All right, now let me go ahead and grab the samurai sword that every gym has. Okay, he's dead.
To have a larger audience and to have that audience, I think, stay with you, you have to bring something extra. You know, you have to find your niche. You have to find what works and what connects with the audience and what makes them laugh and what makes them keep coming back.
You gotta make it a little more exciting, all right? Throw in a hanging bishop. Have everybody in suspense for a moment.
I think the real most important thing is to just get used to being on camera. Like in any sort of performance thing, is get used to talking on camera. my first few videos were terrible, but because I sat down and did it for 6 to 8 hours a day, I just got used to talking and I got over that uncomfortable hump.
If you go into Twitch purely with the expectation that you're going to make money, make a job out of it, have all this growth, and it's going to be great, you're probably going to burn out prior to getting to that point, because there's very little payoff for a long time, right? Like multiple years generally before you really start to see a payoff. And so, those first few times you're streaming, nobody is there. One person shows up every 30 minutes, says hi, maybe, and leaves, right? Like, it's very discouraging, I think, for a lot of people. And so you have to be there just loving it. You have to love talking to yourself when nobody is around. You have to love just the game that you're playing, all of that stuff, because it takes a while. And I think a majority of people burn out prior to getting to the profitable point of it.
And there you have it. My very own YouTube, Twitch, Discord, and streaming channels all ready to go live. It's a veritable social media ecosystem just on the verge of thriving. So, don't forget to smash like and subscribe, and visit my Patreon for perks. Also, go to my merch page. And one last thing, stay cool, my friends.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody. Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, streaming on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals. I'm Carol Masser. Tim is on leave, but of course, with us is our own Bloomberg News Deputy Team Leader for U.S. Equities, Jess Metton, keeping an eye on the markets. But Jess, it does feel like another day as Jamie Dimon continues to speak at that J.P. Morgan Investor Day. We'll talk about some of the highlights in just a moment, but markets just kind of waiting for some news, definitive news out of D.C.
It definitely is, and it's interesting because coming into this week, the NASDAQ 100's off to its best start to a year since 1998, Carol. So obviously you're in this sort of wait and see mode as investors are eager to hear obviously what's going to happen from JP Morgan, but also the looming sort of debt ceiling and what's going on in the background with that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we're going to cover all of that over the next few hours. Also ahead, as we said, the highlights from the Investor Day at JP Morgan. Meantime, it was Ford Capital Markets Day today, and Ford CEO Jim Farley catching up with our own Matt Miller, talking EVs and putting pressure on Tesla. So we're going to get into that. And just speaking of pressure, it is definitely on Micron today. Stocks selling off. We're going to talk about semiconductors because not every name in the stocks is on the downside. In fact, most of them have been higher today.
Right, and chip makers obviously have held up quite well this year compared to last year, but also we're going to get into the MBAs and gender pay gaps as well as innovation at our airports. So I'm excited to hear more about that.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to get into all of that. And, we're also going to talk a little bit about AI because we often check in with the team over at Microsoft 365. They do a lot of workplace trends surveys constantly. They were really incredible, giving us such color during the pandemic in terms of how much we were working online at home and what it meant. But specifically, they are asking the question about AI. And you might be kind of surprised by some of their findings. Maybe not everybody's so freaked out about AI and what it means for their jobs.
Right. I mean, it's been such a hot topic again this year when it comes to that, especially when I see all the strategy notes, Carol.
All right, so we're going to get into that. A lot going on. But right now, We want to talk a little bit about the market, so over to our TV colleagues because, excuse me as I catch my breath, countdown to the close. It starts right now.
Countdown to the close. Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage ahead of the U.S. market close starts right now.
This is the countdown to the close. About 60 minutes left to go here in the trading session. Romaine Bostic joined right now by Scarlett Fu, as well as our colleagues Carol Massar and Jess Menton. Welcome to our audiences across Bloomberg Television, Radio Originals, and those folks streaming on YouTube. But look at the equity markets here on this Monday, Carol. And I think that relief rally that it kind of sputtered out on Friday seems like it's trying to reassert itself today. We're around session highs, but of course still a lot of questions right now about the debt ceiling and the other issues going on in Washington.
Yeah, high expectations, right? The president meeting later on with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. So fingers crossed that maybe they actually get something done, and maybe that's why we're seeing maybe a little bit of optimism, certainly when it comes to, if you look at something like the NASDAQ. Having said that, check out the semiconductor space. You know, Scarlett, I heard you talking about it earlier, I think on Bloomberg Technology, but the SOX is up about 0.4%, but very different story when it comes to Micron Technology, down about 2.9%, coming under pressure after China's cyberspace regulator said that its products failed to pass a cybersecurity review in the country. So the battle is on between the China and the U.S., and especially in the semi space. Check out Taiwan Semi. It's down about 0.9%. In the other direction, AMD, Advanced Micro, it is up about 2%. And so it's interesting to see that I think most names, Jess, in the stocks today are actually higher despite the selling in Micron.
That resiliency is still in the chip space. I wanted to point out, since obviously we're still talking about what's going on with the debt ceiling debate, looking at this anxiety mismatch. So if you look at what's happening with credit default swaps, there was a jump earlier this month, but now we've seen those ease. And then also, right, where is the fear when it comes to the VIX? Still down just below 17. So when you look at these corners of the market, it's not necessarily showing you any sort of signs of panic right now.
Is that a good indicator, right, guys? Like, we talk
the
about
debate
this.
about the VIX.
Yeah, exactly. It's another debate out there.
Well, as far as the broader market here, an S&P 500 that's cracking 4,200, and at least for right now is trying to hold it. Only up about 0.3% here on the day, but I think a lot of folks will take it. The NASDAQ Composite up about 0.7% on the back of big cap tech. And keep an eye on the Russell 2000 out in front today here. A lot of those cyclical names really getting a bid here, though there is some concern that some of this might be a little bit of a short squeeze, particularly when it comes to a lot of those healthcare names in the Russell 2000, Scarlett.
And with the S&P 500 just above 4,200, which has proven to be a pretty stubborn resistance level, you're seeing more sectors in the green than in the red. Communication services, and here we're talking about Alphabet and Meta leading the way here. The exception are the streamers. You've got REITs and energy stocks also firming up. On the downside, consumer staples, and really these are Procter & Gamble, Kimberly-Clark, a couple of spirits companies bucking that trend. And materials companies, they're an underperformer, but for the moment, they're unchanged.
Let's talk about some of those big cap tech names. Alphabet shares up about 2% here on the day. A fresh 52-week high for that stock, 125.23 right now. Keep an eye on that space, and keep an eye on Apple. There was an interesting downgrade a little bit earlier today. This over at Loop Capital, the speculation, of course, about the latest iPhone cycle. That speculation has officially started here, and Loop citing its own research saying that some signs here that unit sales could actually be a little bit less than what some people have priced in. Apple shares, though, only down about 0.5% on the day here. Pfizer, though, having a great day, rallying pretty hard, up about 5%. This on the back of latest research published on that experimental obesity drug. It's actually a diabetes pill, but they're looking for a use case as an obesity drug. And of course, obesity drugs have been all the rage, particularly as it overlaps with some of those diabetes medicine. And Walgreens Boots Alliance only down about 0.5%, but a pretty significant drop here for the stock. At one point on an intraday basis, guys, this was actually down to the lowest level that we've seen going back to 2012. Carol.
All right, so Romaine, you know, I was interesting when you were pointing out what's going on with some of the tech names, right? We continue to see some outperformance in the NASDAQ 100 overall versus the S&P 500 this year, which makes me kind of scratch my head considering what Jim Bullard had to say earlier today, right? We've seen the markets go back and forth in terms of interest rate expectations. Well, Bullard, of course, the president of the St. Louis Fed today at an event in Florida, weighing in on this. The fight for inflation, it is still on, which means maybe more rate increases. Here's what he had to say.
I'm thinking, you know, 2 more moves this year. Now, exactly where those would be this year, I don't know, but I've often advocated sooner rather than later. You want to get the downward pressure on inflation while you can. And also, you know, you want to fight inflation while the labor market's really strong.
All right, that, of course, is Jim Bullard, the president of the St. Louis Fed, at an event, a moderated event, Scarlett, in Florida. But it's kind of interesting, right after we had Jay Powell last week, right? Maybe didn't use the word pause, but we kind of felt that from him.
Right. He signaled that a pause is probably what's to come in June. But I guess this is a way of making sure that the market doesn't think that a pause is going to then lead to a pivot in a rate cut, right? There's always the possibility that if inflation remains pretty sticky at these levels, which is still far above the 2% target, that perhaps a rate hike might be the logical next step if they need to address that.
And a big thing that's come up in my conversations with market technicians is just looking at, obviously, on earlier last week, the S&P 500 did eclipse 4195. That was, at that point, was the high earlier in February for the S&P 500. Now that's been eclipsed, a little bit of a resistance there, but still watching 4200. But as far as just, keeping an eye as far as what those technicals are telling us.
Well, with regards to what we heard out of Bullard, though, too, I mean, he does seem to be a little bit of an outlier, particularly based on what we heard last week from the Fed members, and even just today. I mean, I thought it was interesting. You talk about the comments we heard from Kashkari, who did sort of err on the side here of continuing that tightening, but he did say he was open to a pause. Barkin has basically said that he's open to a pause here. Bostic basically seems like he's ready to basically just say, let's call it quits right now.
Right.
So, I mean, he's a little bit of an outlier here. It'll be interesting to see how much influence he has heading into that June 13th, 14th meeting here, but I think he might actually end up being the odd man out.
Well, he's not a voter this year. We have to point that out. But he also was very early on saying that the Fed needed to do something more aggressively when it comes to fending off inflation. He wasn't wrong about that. So you do wonder, how do you kind of cross him against what we heard from Jay Powell? And maybe it's like you said, Scarlett, just reminding us, folks, they're going to be data dependent. If inflation's still a problem, they're going to have to either keep rates high or even go higher.
And there's still quite a bit of time left before the next FOMC meeting as well, right, on June 14th. So we'll have to get through another big jobs report, another read on inflation before we can even start guessing what happens next.
And also, I mean, we're at the tail end of earnings season. Still, we have a number of retailers that are reporting this week, but overall, things still came in much better than investors were fearing.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about earnings. What does it all mean? We're going to talk with Gina Martin Adams specifically about the earnings recession that we've already seen and kind of where we are at this point. So that is another thing to kind of keep in mind as we go through all of this. All right, guys, we're going to be back in less than an hour's time. Our cross-platform coverage, radio, TV, Bloomberg Originals, and, of course, on YouTube. We're going to count you down to the close on, gosh, it feels like a Monday. We'll be back at 4 p.m. Wall Street time.
It's getting better, a little better all the time.
All right, as we said and we teased, we do want to talk a little bit about what's going on in the earnings picture. I know we just finished essentially an earnings season, and that's what we do around here. It's like, okay, when's the next one? And what does it mean in terms of what we're seeing about the health of corporate America, global corporate profits, and what it means in terms of the economic outlook. So let's get to it. Because we have talked a lot on air, Jess, about an earnings recession already happening. So is it too soon to maybe start talking about an earnings recovery? So on that is Bloomberg Intelligence Chief Equity Strategist Gina Martin Adams in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. So glad to have you here. It's never too soon to start looking ahead. So first of all, we went through an earnings recession. Okay.
We are in the midst of an earnings recession. I wouldn't say that we've gone all the way through it, but we have been in an earnings recession. It's amazing to me how little recognition that we were even in an earnings recession 2022 really brought to the forefront. Most people in 2022 were focused on the Fed, focused on the prospects for economic recession emerging sometime in 2023. And really did not dig into the data to the degree that I think was necessary to detect the idea that, man, the earnings recession has been underway for quite some time. If you look at the S&P 500 on an unadjusted basis, earnings very clearly peaked at the end of 2021. They're down somewhere between 12 and 14% already. So most people say, oh, earnings fell in the fourth quarter, they fell again in the first quarter, and that was the start of earnings recession. That really misses the entire story that's been going on for more than a year now in the index.
That sounds pretty dismal.
Yeah, I mean, it's really consistent with what is a recession, typically in earnings for the S&P 500. This is the other thing that's completely underappreciated. People say, oh, well, analysts are thinking you're going to get a 3% decline in earnings on 2023, and that's not indicative of recession.
And you're like, wait a minute.
And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we've already had a double-digit drop in earnings, and we're going to get another potentially close to 5 to 7% decline on that. That's actually worse than the average earnings recession in the S&P 500 since 1960. So it's just baffling. I think a lot of it is the distortion.
Why isn't it getting attention?
You know, I think because most people look at the headline.
Okay.
They look at overall operating earnings, which, exclude a lot of one-time write-offs, but don't give you a really true perspective on what's going on with the broader earnings stream. They look at, annualized numbers. So if you're looking at 2023 compared to 2022, it doesn't look terrible on the top line. Energy was in a really unique position this cycle where energy was contributing a tremendous amount of growth while everything else was contracting. Virtually everything else was contracting last year, but that masked a lot of underlying weakness. So if all you're looking at is the top line of the S&P 500 and you're looking at it on a different time sequence than quarterly, you're going to miss a lot.
When you bring up energy and how it masked things last year, would the opposite be true this year, to where if it has that forward-looking weakness, would it then mask some of the strength in earnings?
Yeah, and that's already starting to happen as of the current quarter. Energy is one of the weakest sectors in the S&P 500, but there are sectors that are already producing earnings growth off of their declines in 2022, and this is something we highlighted this week in our note. You've got communication services, which is already in its second consecutive quarter of growth. You've got consumer discretionary stocks, which baffles everyone in the midst of a pending recession. Consumer discretionary is already starting to turn around. Strangely, financials also, financials, even though we've talked about all this regional bank crisis, financials had a really rough 2022.
Right.
So the comps are easy for most of the space aside from regional banks, and the result is financials are actually presumably going to post some earnings growth here in 2023.
Something Romaine always talks about, and I like it too, is the small cap space, which I think is so important when it comes to the U.S. economy. Tell us about what your research is finding there.
Yeah, in small caps, we do find a very profound recession. It's not as deep as, say, a 2009 type of recession, but it actually is very evident compared to the S&P 500 right now. One of the things I think is sort of underappreciated also is the role that the dollar and China's shutdown could have played in earnings growth in 2022. Clearly, that lack of sort of multinational revenue compounded by the expanding dollar really hurt large cap stocks in 2022. Small cap stocks are much more representative of what's going on here at home in the U.S. economy, and we're seeing 20% plus declines in small cap earnings on a year-ago basis over the course of 2023. That's embedded in analyst expectations.
Yeah.
So small caps are definitely seeing declines. Now, small caps, there's a lot of nuances in small caps. Anywhere between 25% and 40% of small cap, the small cap index, if you're looking at the Russell 2000 or the Bloomberg 2000, are typically unprofitable enterprises anyway. So keep that in mind. But to see small caps dropping 20%, at least that gives you some indication that, okay, there is some earnings rationality out there, consistent with, I think, what most economists are seeing in the broader economic outlook.
So is the dollar story actually able to help more of these consumer-type oriented names that obviously got hit really hard last year, more so now faring better this year?
Yeah, I think the dollar can be very helpful, provided the dollar is rallying as non-domestic economic conditions are also stable to improving. So where the dollar helps you a lot are companies that sell into China right now or sell into East Asia right now, where economies are clearly not struggling like some of the more developed economies of the world are. But if you're selling into East Asia, where economic activity is only improving and you've got the dollar tailwind as a multinational company, that could be across industries. I wouldn't call out consumer specifically, but it could be some industrials companies. It could also be some tech companies. Could be selling into areas of strength in the world with a dollar tailwind. In Europe, it's a little bit more nuanced. There's a dollar tailwind that has emerged over the course of the last 6 months. European growth is, you would argue, somewhat more stable, but not necessarily accelerating like growth in China and East Asia is.
Can I ask you, why did it not feel so bad as we went through the earnings reports?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, the earnings reports were interesting because I think that didn't feel so bad, partially because analysts are forecasting a pretty major recession. And I understand that this has not been picked up as a popular narrative, but analysts were forecasting a greater than 8% decline in earnings. It turned out to be about a 2.5% decline, close to 3% decline in earnings year over year in the first quarter. I think the narrative, frankly, around recession really got into popular psychology over the course of 2022. That created a big downdraft in analyst expectations.
Folks at Milken thought that recession was going to be done last year. So that's amazing that our conversations were still talking about economic recession this year. Anyway, forgive me. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know. It's been one of the most talked about, longest forecasted recessions that I can remember as well. It just feels like it became such a huge part of the narrative. It had to be embedded in expectations. It had to be embedded in prices. And this is the type of stuff that we started to detect in the fourth quarter of last year. It just became really clear that revision momentum was dropping like a stone. It wasn't going to get much worse. that expectations embedded in stock prices were also extremely low for where we were headed coming into 2023. So even though earnings did contract,
low?
Valuations outside of certain bloated spaces in the S&P 500 are low. Within the small cap index, yes, absolutely. You would argue that whole index's valuations are extremely low relative to history. Within the S&P 500, again, it's more nuanced. Most of the premium in the S&P 500 is very specifically in tech stocks and in the largest stocks in the index.
It's a narrative I've heard a lot,
yeah,
right?
Like
over
not,
how many
years? You know, you look at the
amazing.
rest of the index, the equal weighted index is trading at something like 15.5 times forward earnings. It's not at all expensive. But when you look at that top segment, which everyone is just captivated by and a lot of money is trapped in, those stocks may be more risky.
Okay.
Can you talk to us more about the earnings momentum revision? Because it looks like 12 months out, analysts are actually marking things higher now.
Yep. This is part of the thing that happens at the very bottom of every economic cycle is analysts finally have capitulated to all the chatter of recession and they've embedded their worst case scenarios. I think that happened for a segment, at least, of the S&P 500. We saw it really clearly evolve for something like communication services. And this played out really clearly in the narrative with that space over the last couple of quarters. These companies were cutting costs to the bone to reflect pretty strong distress in their earnings streams. This is the Metas and the Googles, Alphabets of the world, excuse me. So they cut all of their costs to the bone over the course of fourth quarter and then into the first quarter. And now they're beating expectations like crazy because they were able to sort of right-size their ship for a new economic landscape. That's really typical, where analysts are saying, you know what, they're never going to make it. All these companies are never going to earn anything. And we saw that. And this is just a momentum in estimate changes. So even though analyst expectations for future growth are still going down, they're going down at a slower pace than they were in the fourth quarter and in the first quarter. And that momentum shift actually creates a positive uplift for stock prices.
Gina, just have about 45 seconds left. What's the connection between an earnings recession and whether it precludes, right, an economic recession?
Yeah. It is very difficult for you to use the economy as a proxy for what to expect in S&P 500 earnings, right? So, 2 consecutive quarters of contraction in GDP, that was clearly really closely affiliated with the earnings recession that emerged in the S&P. But in the U.S., an economic recession is technically determined by a body of people that looks at a subset of economic indicators. Not all of those economic indicators are truly indicative of what to expect in the earnings trend. For the S&P 500 especially, which a third of which is multinational companies that don't sell a tremendous amount of product into the U.S.
Right.
So there are oftentimes detachments. Without a doubt, if the U.S. economy falls into recession, it definitely impacts small caps materially. It will impact large caps. But if that recession in the U.S. economy does not coincide with a global recession in all economies, there are going to be pockets of strength in the S&P. And I think that's what we're experiencing today.
All right. It's complicated, right?
Absolutely.
It really is so complicated, this market environment. We're so grateful. Thank you so much. Gina Martin-Adams, she's Chief Equity Strategist at Bloomberg Intelligence here in our Interactive Brokers studio. If you're on the terminal, you can certainly check out her latest research, Earnings Recession Ending as Economy Slumps. It's really a great read and so relevant. All right, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar along with Jess Metton, and this is Bloomberg Radio.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Yeah, it's 3:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. J.P. Morgan Chase just wrapping up its investor day. It does say it expects second quarter revenue from investment banking and trading to each slump 15% from a year ago. On an update for the S&P, shares of J.P. Morgan Chase down now by about 0.7%. Stocks edging higher. S&P up 7, up 0.2% ahead of that crucial meeting between President Biden and Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy to iron out roadblocks in debt ceiling negotiations. We've got you covered. Any developments, we'll have them for you first right here on Bloomberg Business Week, and of course also on Daybreak Asia tonight. So the S&P 500 index right around 4,200. Can we see further gains for stocks at these levels? Elise Alsenbaugh is Global Investment Strategist at J.P. Morgan Securities.
Over the near term, we think so. You think about the favorable earnings that came in well above expectations for the first quarter. You think about this debt ceiling overhang that arguably is probably putting a lid on the broad index. And so long as we get a resolution to the debt ceiling, which is our base case, we do think that it's possible in the near term you actually see the S&P 500 break above our year-end target of 4,300.
And right now, S&P at 4197, up 0.1%. The Dow down 0.3%, down 96 points. NASDAQ up 72, up 0.6. We've got the 10-year yielding 3.71%, the 2-year 4.31%. Spot gold down 0.3%, 1972 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.6%, 71.99 a barrel. The State Department says the U.S. has serious concerns about China's move to restrict sales of Micron technology. Micron shares down 2.8%, among other chip names. Qualcomm down 0.7%, Nvidia unchanged, AMD up 1.8%. And that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It is indeed. All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. You are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Carol Massar along with Jess Metton on this Monday. Bloomberg Business Week brought to you by BNY Mellon Insight, June 6th through the 8th in Orlando, Florida. Do not miss the essential event for the financial advice community. Visit insight.bnymellon.com. We're, in fact, going to be broadcasting live from it, so there'll be some really fun conversations. Speaking of fun, it is Ford Capital Markets Day today in Dearborn, and having some fun at I believe, Coney Dog in downtown Detroit is our own Matt Miller, radio and TV anchor, my co-host, at times, lover of all things four wheels, two wheels, and more. Matt, first of all, nice to have you here with Justin and myself. Where the heck are you? And you look like you fit in there.
National Coney. Anyone who's been to Detroit knows that the local food is a Coney dog, right? Which is basically a hot dog with chili on it. And there are really only two places to get those. The classic Coney's, National Chili, and then there's another chain that I won't mention while I'm in here.
Nice.
But yeah, whenever I go to Detroit, I stop here first, get my fix of Coney's, and then I go on and do whatever business I came here to do.
I'm just going to tell you and get them at my kitchen too, because that's how my husband likes his hot dogs, with chili on it. Okay, so tell us what you were in. I mean, we know why you were in Detroit. You had some interesting conversations.
Yeah, I had an interview with the CEO of Ford today, and the reason that he invited me along with the rest of his executive board and a ton of Wall Street analysts is that Ford is trying to convince the street that they can meet their goal of producing 2 million EVs in 2026, and probably a lot more importantly, that they can actually make money on those EVs, right? Because they're slated to sell about $3 billion worth of electric vehicles this year, and they're slated to lose about $3 billion on their sales. So currently their margin is like negative 100%, but they say they are going to be able to boost it to 8% on EVs by 2026, and that's what they want to convince analysts of.
Something I was curious about, Matt, is, I mean, we did get Ford's earnings earlier this month, and they beat on first quarter profit, but they obviously warned on their outlook for this year. I'm kind of wondering, how does the EV sort of fit into that dynamic, and how much growth could that potentially, when you're hearing and talking to the CEO of Ford, does he think that that could potentially help things moving forward?
So the EV, last year they only sold 61,000 EVs in the U.S. And of course, they sell millions of cars. So it's hardly anything. But hopefully that share is going to increase. still, it's not the, the cold steel that they sell off dealership lots that makes them money. They're hoping to get, like I said, margins back to 8%. In their traditional ICE business, they're hoping to be around 10%, which is where they are right now. They make a ton of money on the F-150 trucks that they sell with gas engines. But the real growth, according to Farley, is going to come from software and services. They have, for example, a business unit, Ford Pro, that works with, contractors, plumbers, electricians, etc. And they make a ton of money, like big fat margins, selling software that can tell you, if your engine is got a problem, if your door needs fixed. They even can tell if your windshield wiper is moving in a way that that means it's about to break. So that's where they see the growth coming, and that's what they're hoping to see in the future.
Sounds like it's not only the year of efficiencies at Meta, it's also at Ford Motor Company. And Matt did catch up with Ford CEO Jim Farley to talk about the efficiencies that it could put together, all of them in many different forms. Listen up, everybody.
We're making progress. It needs to go faster, but a new culture is setting in the company. We have, a lot of other competitors have made a lot of personnel reductions. We see that as kind of more of in our journey on cost and quality, more of an output metric. So what we want to reduce is more like the bill of material cost, the industrial cost in the plants, a lot of extra inventory we want to get out, as well as our negotiated costs with the suppliers. So our cost we want to get out is actually in the heart of our industrial system. It's not like just people.
You have said in the past you have 25% more engineers working on the same output as your competitors. Does that mean you're going to reduce that 25%? Are you letting it happen through attrition? How's it working?
We're very intentional about this, Matt. I think you're going to see from Ford over many years a natural reduction, not through attrition, but skill mismatch, intentional transition of our teams, moving some of the engineering to lower cost labor sources. So it'll be a combination of things, but it's obvious that we have to be more efficient.
Uncompetitive advertising and marketing spend is also something that you've called out.
Actually, I would say on our Blue business, we've underinvested in advertising. We want on our e-business really not to do a lot of broadcast advertising. We want the product to speak for itself, and really the investment in the marketing there is really the ownership model. So people kind of come back and high loyalty. Same with Pro. On the Blue business, we are starting to see inventories grow for the whole industry. We're in a great space. We have a really fresh lineup of vehicles. But that merchandising capability, I would assume we're going to have to spend more this year. And prices will come down, thankfully for the customer, after all these years of tight supply.
How much do you think prices are going to come down? And what's going to drive that?
We're assuming in our plan this year and next year, 5+% reduction. It's kind of in between where we were maybe in 19 and where we've been. I don't think we're going to go back to the days a couple of years ago of 100-day supply. So most people are in the 50-day supply range. I think the natural discounting for someone who has an older product is going to be in the thousands. You're starting to see now low APRs from a lot of brands who have older product. What's unique about Ford is we have an all-new lineup. So, we're a bit of a unicorn. But I think the background pricing will be more difficult.
You've said in the past, or people have asked, how do you get from 8% on your EV business, you want to do 10% overall, to like the 17% that Tesla has? Do you get up there, or do they, you think, eventually see margin pressure?
It's a good question. Both are going to happen. We're seeing, look at what's happening in China with BYD. Look what's happening with Tesla. They've reduced their prices on Model Y, their main product, $5,000, $7,000. It goes up, it goes down, but it's pretty far down. I think, they've had the market to themselves. They have a big head start, kind of like what we do on Pro. And now they're seeing a lot more pressure, obviously. I think we're going to definitely see that, especially in the two-row crossover. We think there'll be like 50 to 100 new models. So, and a lot of people want to grow. So it's going to be a great time to buy a two-row electric EV for customers like Mach-E. Where we compete really in EV, pickup trucks, three-row crossovers that we're going to show people today, And the commercial vehicle, EV commercial vehicles, we don't see as much price, competition because there's not as many vehicles choices there.
All right, that, of course, is the Ford CEO, Jim Farley, talking there with Matt. Matt, I'm trying to understand if they're going to be cutting prices. They're projecting, billions of dollars of losses for their EV unit this year. I mean, how is it that they ultimately get to that 8% return on EVs? It's not going to be easy. I get the efficiencies, but it's going to be tough.
No, it's not going to be easy, but they're taking out $2.5 billion of costs this year, and they think that they have $6 to $7 billion of structural cost disadvantages compared to competitors that they want to take out by the middle of the decade. So you add that to the software and services revenue that they hope to really start generating, especially from the EV cars. And remember, they're cutting prices on, just like Tesla, right? On the cheaper vehicles. The more expensive vehicles are not getting cut. In fact, those prices are rising. So if you want, an F-150 Lightning, or if you want a Raptor R, or if you want a Bronco Wildtrak, you're not getting a price cut on those. You're not getting a price cut on any of the Halo cars, just the cheaper stuff.
You know what I really want? I want a Coney dog. Can you bring one back?
Yeah, I'll get you a Coney to go.
That'll be pretty ugly by the time it gets here.
I'm loving that leather jacket, Matt.
He wears it well. He wears it well.
Thank you. Mike McKee didn't like this. Apparently, he doesn't like the look. It is an authentic 1943 pilot's jacket from World War II.
All right. We'll get Mike in, and the two of you can kind of debate it out. All right, Matt, safe travels back home. Of course, our Matt Miller there in Detroit. All right, let's get a check on world and national news. Off to D.C. we go. Not D.C., but our Bloomberg newsroom, in New York, and Denise Pellegrini. Hi, Denise.
Hey there, Carol. Thank you. And it is round 3 of debt ceiling negotiations that you've been talking about. That begins at 5:30 this afternoon, a one-on-one with President Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. And Bloomberg's Bill Ferries reports the clock is ticking on a deal.
If you think early June is really kind of the deadline date when the U.S. hits this debt ceiling, you have to get that legislation moving through the House and Senate probably by the end of this week for it to get to the president's desk in time.
Yeah, and Ferries also says it'll be a challenge to reach a deal that can pass in time in a sharply divided Congress. An extension could be a possibility. Both sides, though, have said they don't want that. South Carolina Republican Senator Tim Scott announcing the launch of his 2024 presidential campaign in Charleston today.
This administration has taxed, borrowed, and spent trillions of dollars trying to replace a hand up with handouts.
Now, Scott describes country under the Biden administration as a nation in retreat that's losing jobs, religious liberties, and more. And Scott is now toe-to-toe with President Donald Trump, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, and, of course, former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson. And there are more waiting in the wings, potentially. Nebraska instituting a ban on abortions after 12 weeks. Governor Jim Pillen.
LB 574 is the most significant win for social conservative agenda in over a generation in the state of Nebraska. I think that's something we need to clap and shout about.
Now, Pillen also says the Let Them Grow Act also includes a ban on gender-affirming medical care for anyone under the age of 19. And that starts in October. Global News, 24 hours a day. I'm Denise Pellegrini. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 3:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long. At Bloomberg, we've got Wall Street watching Washington. Stocks are little changed. Let's head right over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. Here he is, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. U.S. stocks trading mixed right now, with the Dow currently down 123 points. S&Ps are higher by 2, and NASDAQ climbs by 59. The U.S. 10-year yield at 3.72%. Gold is down 5, oil trading in the green, and Bitcoin is little changed. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, leaders were telecom and real estate. Consumer staples were under pressure. And leaders to the upside in the Dow, 3M and American Express, while Nike fell 3% and led to the downside. Regarding the debt ceiling, McCarthy said, "I think we can make it all happen by the debt deadline." And in others, Pfizer jumped 4% intraday on a report their weight loss pill may be as effective as Ozempic. In deal news, Chevron announced a pact to buy PDC Energy for $72 a share. And wrapping things up, Zoom Video reports after the bell. Live from the first word breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill Maloney. Zoom, by the way, up now by 3% to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg. Type Squawk, SQUA, on your Bloomberg terminal. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no.
Who's gonna drive you home?
Honey, please, I'll do the driving.
Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
It's
the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, just about 18 minutes, just under 18 minutes left in today's trading session. Carol Massar along with Jess Metten live in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio on Bloomberg YouTube, or I should say on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals as well, our streaming service. You heard Charlie talking about the markets, Jess, bouncing around. I mean, I said, I feel like over the last week or so, we've had a lot of meh trading days. It felt like we did break out a little bit last week, an optimism of maybe a deal getting done out of D.C., but it just does feel like we're marking time a little bit until this gets done.
Definitely, and obviously we've talked about the technicals there with the S&P 500 as well as the NASDAQ 100. So especially after a gangbuster year, it makes sense to some of my sources that we'd see a little bit of a pullback from here.
All right, so let's get into it with our Drive to the Close guest. Max Wasserman is back with us, founder and senior portfolio manager at the independent investment advisory firm Miramar Capital. He's joining us once again on Zoom from Northbrook, Illinois. Max, nice to have you here. Top of mind for you on this Monday.
Well, thank you for having me. I think the biggest thing that I would focus on is disparity within the market itself. Really, 5 technology companies are accounting for 80% of the S&P's total return. It's NVIDIA's, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Apple. And if you look at it from that perspective, it's really the NASDAQ that's carrying the whole market. The equal-weighted part of the market's actually up only 1 to 2%. So if you look at the market, it's really a NASDAQ retracement of what they lost last year. And it's concentrated in 5 stocks, which we think is not that healthy for the market.
So if it's not that healthy for the market, how are you positioning in the stock market at this point?
Well, we're dividend growth investors, so we're looking for valuations that make reasonable sense, pays a good yield. While we do have investments in some of the large cap techs, we're looking in cyclicals, we're looking in healthcare, energy, companies that we think have reasonable valuations. Right now, if you look at the top 5 stocks, they have a forward PE of 31 times. So with the NASDAQ being up 20%, we don't think the risk reward is really favorable from this level in that area of the market. But there's other areas of the markets, in the cyclicals, the energies, the healthcare. They're trading at mid-teens, which is less than the S&P itself.
You know, what I find interesting is that we have had this, if you go back maybe a couple of years ago or so, or I don't know, I'd have to look at my calendar to really denote the exact timeframes. But Max, we've had these conversations before that the overall gains of the market are really fueled by a handful of names, those big tech names, only for folks to say, yep, stepping back from them, don't make sense, overdone. And then we just see more money go into it, and we see them pop to the upside because so much of our economy is really a lot of what these companies are doing. So how do you kind of factor that in fundamentally?
Well, if we look at it, you have to take a step back. If you look last year, for example, when the NASDAQ was down 32%, right? And the S&P was down around 20. Equal weighted and dividend oriented stocks were down in the high single digits. So if you look at a company like Apple, which we have an investment in, it's back to where it was in August of 22. So the stock just made a complete retrenchment. If you look back into NVIDIA and some of these techs, all these companies just made a retrenchment to where they were trading a year ago. So it's not like these are making ultimate new highs by tremendous amount. I mean, they're making some new highs like Microsoft, but it's not by a significant amount. So what we're saying to people, for new money, be cautious jumping into the NASDAQ. The S&P 500 has become, the ETFs, if you will, have become a mini NASDAQ 100. If you think about it, Apple and Microsoft account for almost 14% of the weighting in the S&P. So as technology goes, so goes the general market. But there's a lot of other areas which have a better asymmetrical return. And if we look at somebody long term, if you bought the NASDAQ a year ago, all you're doing is barely breaking even now. Where it had you have been a little bit more conservative and not chased into these stocks at highs, you wouldn't be hurt as much. But yeah, now year to date, everybody likes tech because it's a story. Well, we look at the debt ceiling as more of a political issue than anything. The issues that we see is if you get they fail to ratify the debt ceiling, you could get a 5 to 10% pullback, but we think that's political and we would use that as a buying opportunity. We haven't changed anything based on the debt ceiling because it's day to day and it's not a strategy. It's just trying the whims of the politics. What you have to look at, though, that has affected people's strategy is what's happening in the banking area. You know, regional banks are having a harder time. Large money center banks are having a hard time, given the fact that the interest rate risk they took didn't pay off. So from that perspective, we've de-emphasized financials, and we have been underweight in financials for some time. But we make the regional banks, and we do have an investment in one. We still think it's going to be languishing for a while until they fix the balance sheets a little bit better.
How does what the Fed do? And I don't want to get into what the Fed will do because we could go back and forth from day to day or week to week. But how does what the Fed ultimately does and where it lands and for how long impact your strategy right now?
Well, how it impacts is liquidity. So if the Fed, you know, we look as the Fed maybe one or two more possibility. But they may pause next time just to try to digest everything that's going on. But I could still see another 25 to 50 basis points by year end, which is contrary to what everybody's thinking the Fed's going to cut. I think people are hoping the Fed's going to cut to justify this enthusiasm in the NASDAQ. And it's also the market's trying to talk the Fed into doing something. I mean, right now, the Fed gave so much liquidity for so many years. To take it back, they have to get rid of the embedded inflation. And that's a bigger risk. So to us, the thing that we would change, if we thought the Fed was going to shift policy and going to cut interest rates, then we probably move to a little bit more higher beta type stocks, if you will, because they'll do better in lower interest rates. But right now, we see no reason to change, especially with valuations. Technology is not offering it to us. And again, we have investments in there. We just don't think the risk reward. But also, if they cut interest rates or they slow it down, we think everything's going to be a fourth quarter story reflecting 2024. And there we see the market much stronger, and we think the market will start reflecting that. So we think the Fed's not as big of an issue right now. It's just really digesting everything it's done.
All right, we're going to leave it, I think, on that note. Listen, thank you so much. Some really thoughtful advice for us on this Monday. Max Wasserman, he's founder and senior portfolio manager at Miramar Capital, independent registered investment advisory firm, joining us on Zoom from Northbrook, Illinois. But it's just interesting as I think everybody tries to figure out the way forward, but you've got to, if you've got some money to put to work, you've got to kind of figure it out, right?
Right, and then you don't want to miss out on particular rallies. Obviously, it depends on time horizon, what kind of money you're managing for clients, whether this is retirement money or obviously more of a hedge fund, shorter term type trade.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, we're just about 11 minutes left in today's trading session. We are definitely off our best levels of the day, especially when it comes to the Dow and the S&P and the NASDAQ for that matter, but just a slight gain there on the NASDAQ as we speak. You are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Chevron CEO Mike Wirth says he is open to more deals after agreeing to buy PDC Energy for $6.3 billion, but will stay disciplined on price. Oil and gas producers are flush with cash after raking in record profits over the past year, leaving the American energy patch ripe for a takeover boom. Shares of PDC Energy, they're up now by 7.4%. As for Chevron shares, they are trading lower. Ryanair CEO Michael O'Leary says his airline will keep growing capacity to take market share in Europe, but he also sees more reasonable pricing. He spoke this morning with Bloomberg Radio at our New York headquarters.
Even though there's not a lot of positives, if any positives out there in the market, we're seeing just multiple expansion as we drift up.
And also, too, we do have shares, the ADRs, down by 0.3%. That, by the way, we heard from Michael O'Rourke. An Uber executive was suspended after an attempt to address staff uproar over a company event about race titled Don't Call Me Karen backfired. Today, we're seeing Uber shares trade higher by 0.1%. Micron Technology shares lower after China banned the company's chips, saying they failed to pass a cybersecurity review. Shares of Micron, they're down by 2.9%. Qualcomm down 0.6%. NVIDIA down 0.3%. Those are some of the company stories we're following this hour. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody. As you know, Tim is on leave. I'm Carol Massar, along with Bloomberg's Jess Men. I have to just tell you, after Charlie said that Uber story, I was like, wait, what's going on? And I guess what happened is the Uber's long-term head of diversity, Bo-Young Lee, put on leave last week, according to a spokesman for Uber. Lee hosted an event last month that centered on the experience of being an American white woman and included a discussion of the Karen moniker, which is used to describe a white woman who is perceived to be entitled or demanding. And then I guess the event sparking some backlash among some employees who felt the conversations were dismissive of people of color. A moving forward session to address frustrations was held on Wednesday, but that apparently just ignited even more outrage. So yeah, there's a full write through on Bloomberg.com. I just wanted to get a little bit more what that was about.
I'm trying to follow up on that. And then obviously we have to talk about what happened with Meta today, looking at this record fine here of over $1 billion in the EU over these U.S. data transfers. But funny enough, I mean, if you're looking at its stock today,
it's a privacy fine, right? Which we know the EU has been very vigilant, if you will, when it has to going after big technology, especially when it comes to privacy concerns.
Exactly, and we've seen different fines when it comes to Alphabet, Google's parent. Obviously, if you're looking at Meta stock, though, ticker symbol META, it's up around 1%, and also
kind of bucking the meh trend, although it was up 3% earlier
today.
And
this whole cost-cutting conversation that we've been having, especially during earnings season, and we're seeing this spill over to not even just growth companies, but other corners of the market too. But look back to early November, Carol, if you look at Meta stock up about 160% after it made those two huge tranches of job cuts, which is obviously very painful for anyone that has to go through that. But when you're looking on the Wall Street aspect of it, they've really been rewarding these types of companies this year that have been going through those efforts.
No, it's been on quite a tear. I was trying to go back and see, though, how much Meta, let's see, at its high was about $382 a share, so we're at $248. So it still has a ways to go, but it definitely has bounced back a lot, certainly when it comes to today's trade. But yeah, we'll see, right? They're doing this transition, although they got back to kind of, it feels like, more on track with the core business. We kind of heard that in the last, I think, earnings go round. So we'll keep an eye on it. Folks, just a couple minutes left in today's trading session. We're going to head over to our TV colleagues, Romaine and Scarlett, in just a moment. We're pretty much flat on the S&P 500. Dow down about 0.4%. NASDAQ holding on to a gain of about 0.4%. Beyond the Bell right now starts.
Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostic alongside Scarlett Fu. We're counting you down to the closing bell, and here to help take us beyond the bell. It's a global simulcast with Carol Masser and Jess Menton. Welcome to our audiences across Bloomberg Television, Radio Originals, and those folks streaming on YouTube here. Carol, the NASDAQ has held most of its gains. The Russell has held most of its gains, but the S&P 500 right now dipping into the red as we get closer to those bells.
Yeah, very little change there on the S&P 500, the broader market. Having said that, really some outperformance in the financials today. If you look at the KRE, the regional banks up more than 3%. PacWest, some big momentum behind that move. And then if you look at the KBW Bank Index, it too is up about 1.75%, Jess. So really, that's where you're seeing some outperformance overall here today.
And even coming into this week, if you look at the NASDAQ 100, it's on pace for its best start to a year since 1998. So even though we are seeing a little bit of pressure there in some of those growth-oriented corners of the market, still it's been quite on a tear when it comes to tech and growth this year.
Absolutely. I guess it's kind of surprising for a change to see the NASDAQ being eclipsed by the Russell 2000. We were just talking to Brent Schutte of Northwestern Mutual Asset Management. He said if you're looking past the recession and looking to play on the cyclical recovery, small caps might be a way to do it because they're so undervalued.
Yeah, we should point out that some of the strength that we're seeing in the Russell, some of that is tied to short covering, particularly when it comes to the healthcare space. And then, of course, we know regional banks, there's almost a little bit of a relief rally, still deep in the hole. But nevertheless, I think some people will take it here on a Monday afternoon where there's still a lot of concerns about the Fed, still a lot of concerns about the unresolved debt ceiling impasse. As we get the closing bell here in New York, it looks like the S&P 500 is going to finish the day relatively unchanged. It will take some time for these numbers to settle here, but the damage is pretty much there. 4192 and change on the S&P 500, a flirt above 4,200 at one point on the day, but a close below that. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lower on the day by about 140 points or 0.4%. The NASDAQ Composite higher on the day by about 63 points or 0.5%. And as we were just speaking about, the Russell 2000 going to close out the day higher by about 1.2%.
All right, Romaine, and in the S&P 500, kind of an even split, but a little bit more of the gainers, Scarlett, winning in today's session. 287 names to the upside, some with some really strong gains here. And then you've got about 215 names to the downside, one unchanged.
Yeah, speaking of some of the strong gains, taking a look at the industry groups, if you lump them into 24 different groups, autos and components up almost 4% on the day. A lot of that is Tesla, but also Matt Miller has been making news with his interviews with Ford. You'll want to check that out on the Bloomberg. Media entertainment is really Google, or I should say Alphabet at this point. Alphabet giving a lift to those companies, not the streamers. And banks, notably, I was just checking, and you have 14 out of 15 lenders in the green. The exception is JP Morgan Chase, which held its investor day today. On the downside, some consumer names, whether it's consumer durables or household and personal products, as well as food, beverage, and tobacco, all off about 1.5% as those consumer companies continue to report their results.
All right, last time we checked with Matt Miller, by the way, he was eating a hot dog in Detroit. So we'll talk about that maybe, perhaps. Let's get to some of the individual gainers in today's session. PacWest, I talked about the regionals and the bank sector overall. Scarlett mentioned it as well. Really some outperformance, and a lot of the reason why was PacWest coming out today, agreeing to sell a $2.6 billion portfolio of about 74 real estate construction loans to Kennedy Wilson. It was part of its previously announced plan. It's all about moves to shore up liquidity. So you did see PacWest really outperformance up about 20% in today's session. Match Group, number one gainer in the S&P 500, at least last time I checked, a gain of about 6.7%. Meta executive Stefan Tain named Chief Product Officer at its dating app Hinge. That was some of the news. Maybe that was a reason for a catalyst to send it higher. So again, some outperformance there. And then Vectiv Bio Holding. It's about $1 billion biotech company, soaring today, up about 36% here by the close. This is after the company was agreed to be acquired by Ironwood for $17 per share. It's an all-cash transaction. The company putting out a statement. So again, we've seen some deal flow happening, Jess, and certainly in today's trade as well.
And I'll take the decliners. Looking at Micron Technology, we've been talking about this all day, but looking at stock declining nearly 3%. It was its worst day since the beginning of the month, so this does come after China's cybersecurity regulator said its products failed to pass a cybersecurity review, so that move would basically potentially jeopardize some of the company's sales and obviously what's a pretty crucial market for it. And also I have to bring up what's happening with Apple stock slipping about 0.5%. So what happened there, Loop Capital actually downgraded its stock from hold to buy, and And the analysts there did warn that the company's current quarter could prove disappointing when it comes to its revenue growth and those expectations there. And then finally, looking at Foot Locker, we already saw that stock very under pressure on Friday. On that day, it declined about 27%. You look today, it's down about 8.5%. So extending that sell-off after analysts at Citi and Williams Trading did cut their recommendations on the stock.
Let's take a quick look at the yield space here, because another day here and a little bit more of a sell-off when it comes to the treasuries, particularly on the shorter end of the curve here. You did see cheapening specifically on the 2-year, 6 basis points higher on that 2-year yield, now at 4.32 and change here. Similar moves that we saw on the 10-year and even out on the 20 and 30-year, up about 3 to 4 basis points. Some of this, of course, tied specifically to what's going on with the Fed and the expectations about the next move. Of course, a lot of this also tied to what we're seeing when it comes to the debt ceiling debate. We got, of course, the latest numbers, guys, here out of the Treasury on their cash balance, something that we've been paying more attention to than we've probably paid attention to in our entire life. $60 billion, 60.65 to be specific is what we have. That's as of Friday. Remember, this is data is delayed, so that's slightly above where we were on Thursday at about 57 billion, but Goldman Sachs economists estimating here that we could fall about below that $30 billion threshold, the key threshold that Yellen signaled as soon as June 1st or 2nd.
And of course, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and President Biden are scheduled to meet at around 5:30 p.m. today. Remember, this is Biden returning back to Washington, canceling the rest of his Asia trip to make sure that he's in town to start dealing with these debt ceiling discussions. You know, 8 business days until June 1st, the ex-date that Janet Yellen has identified. They could easily just suspend the debt ceiling while they hammer out an agreement.
Yeah, we should just point out real quick here that one of the key negotiators in that debt ceiling negotiations, Representative McHenry, speaking to reporters right now and saying that they want to see a debt limit deal within the next 24 hours. And I think this is key here, because this is beyond just negotiation. You got to get something on the table that the House members can actually vote for, and then it has to go to the Senate. And you're not just up against, whatever sort of political will is, but, I mean, guys, Congress doesn't actually, work a full, actual, year-long schedule. They got vacations.
Maybe they'll work on the weekend.
Yeah, they got Have you met our Congress?
I don't know. I've worked on weekends. I don't know about you guys, right? We all have. What's interesting is, Kevin McCarthy did come out and say we could get a deal tonight, we could get one tomorrow. But from what I understand, they really haven't agreed to anything yet. So they've really got to kind of get moving because there's a lot of specifics to work out.
What about the next day? Did you use that as a possibility?
Yeah, I guess you could. Yeah, exactly.
I guess what do they say? If, ands, and buts.
I think what's good though, right, is that they're saying that they do see a deal can be made. So you do wonder about what's been moving behind the scenes.
That's what they both agree on. But beyond that, there's not much agreement.
Yeah, I agree. Keep an eye on that here. And believe it or not, earnings season isn't over either. There are some earnings crossing the wire. This on Zoom video, of course, the big pandemic darling, coming out with their first quarter numbers, and 1Q revenue coming in at about $1.11 billion. That's slightly above the consensus estimates. Here's their outlook for the year. They're seeing full year revenue can come in at a range of about $4.47 billion to $4.49 billion. So the low end of that range is actually above the top end of the previous range that they've got. So I guess you can call this a bit of a beat and raise quarter here for Zoom, though a modest beat and a raise. But I was pointing out, I mean, you see the shares up 5% in after hours trading here. They were actually on a tear, up about 16, 17% for the month of May, which I was looking back. This is actually going to be their best monthly performance since the pandemic, basically going back to mid-2020, should this hold.
Yeah, quite a bounce, right? That's pretty impressive. I'm just looking at the press release, but keep in mind it's way still off some of the higher levels that we've seen in this name. But in the press release, we're taking a look at the company's founder and CEO saying, solid start to the year enabled us to raise our outlook for the fiscal year 2024 while continuing to invest in innovations such as AI to help make interactions more meaningful and communications more effective.
I'm also seeing enterprise customers, 215,900 versus the consensus estimate of 217,000. So that is later than anticipated, but it does end the first quarter with a gain of 9% from what it was the same time last year.
And something that was important to Piper Sandler analysts, they were really focusing on what the company is going to end up saying about any sort of buyback plans, because that's something, this theme that we've seen during earnings season. And we were actually talking, Carol and I, to Gina Martin-Adams about this, and there's actually been more of a peak when it comes to inflation comments in these earnings calls, but actually more of a concern as far as what is coming to the dividend plans as well as buyback plans.
Can I give you some?
I feel like they should be pouring that money back into the business.
Wait, you want some perspective?
It's a utility now.
Wait, can you guys remember back in October of 2020 how high Zoom went?
Yeah.
How much?
What was the high?
Don't cheat.
Oh.
Don't use the Bloomberg. That's cheating.
Well, that's not
She
cheating.
saw
This
me
is what we
look
get
over.
paid for here.
$568 a share.
Okay.
71 now.
It's 71.
And that's when it wasn't even profitable, right?
It's like perspective. All right, guys, we got to wrap. That'll do it for our cross-platform coverage. Radio, TV, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. Beyond the Bell, we call it. We will see you again, same time, same place tomorrow. In today's trade, stock under pressure after China's cyberspace regulators said that its products failed to pass a cybersecurity review in the country, and this comes on the heels of a Bloomberg exclusive last week of Micron said to be getting $1.5 billion from the Japanese government to make next-gen memory chips in Japan. So let's get to what it all means, because it's certainly an important sector. I mean, we all know chips go into so much, and how it really fits in, especially the Micron news, into the overall semi space. So let's get to it. Paula Pencal is with us, Bloomberg Intelligence Semiconductors analyst in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Also with us is Ian King, Bloomberg News U.S. Semiconductor Networking reporter on the phone in San Francisco. And Ian, you were part of the team that put together that exclusive last week about the investment in Micron. Let's start with you. A lot of news, a lot going on with Micron. You always remind me not every semiconductor is the same. Tell us about the news around Micron and why it's important to follow what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, this is being seen as an escalation of the ongoing trade dispute, trade war, call it what you want, between the U.S., which is the largest creator of semiconductors, and China, which is the largest market for semiconductors. And what's going on here really is that Micron is being told by the Chinese government, we don't like your products, we don't think they're safe, and we're going to ban them from critical infrastructure. A lot of lack of clarity around what that actually means and what that impact is going to have, but obviously as a headline, that's not a pretty one.
And Paula, I want to bring you into this conversation. So as an analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence, what's your sort of big takeaway in the development of all of this?
Well, first of all, we don't really know what the impact is, as Ian had pointed out. Mark Murphy, the CFO, commented today at JP Morgan's conference that the impact could be anywhere from single-digit percent impact to top-line revenue, or it could be low single-digit up to high single-digit. But then he went on to say, but we really don't have a lot of clarity. China was light on what exactly it meant by the security risk. The one thing I would point out is it's clearly, it does appear to be a political posturing, because typically memory chips are not targeted by hackers just because they tend to have storage. They don't have a lot of specific software that runs on it or code. So that sort of supports the fact that this is definitely likely a political move.
I mean, yeah, right, Ian. I mean, it's a little wacky, right? If you remind us that not all chips are the same. Paul, the same thing. But I mean, it's a little weird, and I do wonder, as you follow this space, is it just a case until this political football kind of calms down a little bit? I mean, is that the expectation? I mean, I feel like the rhetoric, especially when it comes to semis and high tech, just continues to get tougher and tougher between the U.S. and China.
No, I think you're absolutely right. The general direction is towards escalation, and the concern that overarching is of the so-called decoupling, that these two markets will just learn to live without each other, but in the interim that will cause an awful lot of pain. And the way to look at the Micron action, according to what some people think, is like China has not responded to a lot of what the U.S. has done over the last couple of years because it couldn't, because it didn't have anything to really fight back with. The Micron thing is the one thing that it could fight back with. They don't need Micron. They can get exactly the same chips from Samsung, exactly the same chips from Hynix, and therefore this isn't going to hurt them. They're not shooting themselves in the foot by taking action against Micron. And if perhaps for the political audience back in Beijing, this looks like they are doing something, and it looks like they're being strong.
Paula, I'm curious as far as, do we have any sort of scope as far as how this could end up impacting Micron's financials?
Well, again, they are unclear. The company has communicated to investors they are unclear as to the exact impact, but it could be anywhere from low single digits to high single digits, but they really don't know. I would say, though, that just to follow up on what Ian was saying, it is a little bit of a slippery slope for China, though, because even though they don't need these memory chips because they can source them elsewhere, there are other chips that they do need from the U.S. So it really is a battle between the two, and Micron's sort of stuck in the middle.
Well, there was some great reporting. I think it might have been by Debbie Wu, or maybe it was by you, Ian. That Micron. And I'm reading from the story, Micron still depend on the global electronic supply chains that often run through Chinese factories. I mean, this is the tricky stuff, right? When we talk about globalization, that train has left the station. And when you look at something like semiconductors, right, it's a global supply chain. And so how do you look at something like that and ultimately where Micron lands, with or without China?
Yeah, no, to back up what Paula said and go back to what the CFO himself said, he's like, we don't know, first of all, ultimately, we don't know. But guess what? As much as a quarter of Micron's sales somehow go through China, whether it's Hong Kong headquartered companies, whether it's through the distribution channel, we don't know, right? Because China is the world's device manufacturing center. So you really need to be there. You need to have those relationships. So anything that breaks up that chain that we've seen, develop over the last 30 years, this, interdependency is not good.
So Ian, go to the story that you and a colleague out of Asia broke last week about Micron getting $1.5 billion from the Japanese government for next-gen chips. So roll that into this story and the reporting.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way to perhaps segue into that, because everybody in the world, the US, the Europeans, the Japanese, and the Koreans are like, look, we want chip independence too, right? We need to build our own factories. Japan's a little bit late to the game, but guess what? Hey, Micron, come and build here. How does that look if you're China? Samsung has a chip factory in China. Hynix has a chip factory in China. Micron doesn't, right? How does that look?
Yeah, exactly. Paula, come in on that.
Yeah, I would just say, there's an element of, Micron sort of like covering their bases just in case. And, I think like a couple of years ago, they had planned to build in Japan and then, at their Hiroshima plant, extend their capability there, but they backed out. The market went south and so on and so forth. But here they are back to the table. Everybody's sort of coming forth with their own equivalent to the U.S. CHIPS Act. Japan is, Singapore is, even China is, I'm hearing like $149 billion going to subsidize the sector. So Japan's taking advantage of this opportunity now to sort of establish itself and hopefully emerge as a new manufacturing hub within Asia.
I do wonder too, though, Ian, like how ultimately does this work then? If everybody's kind of developing their domestic chip industry, yay, great, I guess, right? It's in your backyard. But at some point, is it going to be problematic and require almost government support at some point? Because it's cyclical, right? We always talk about this, and I do wonder, is it going to ultimately end up in a glut of chips in a lot of markets?
What Sanjay Jha, the CEO of Micron, told me off, saying that my thinking was too mired in the past. But that thinking is very much that this is a viciously cyclical industry. We've seen loads and loads of plans in the past about building factories here, there, and everywhere. And guess what? When things get tight, those factories get built, and they never get equipment put in them. Those factories get built, and they end up doing something else. So believe it when you see the chips rolling off these lines would be my caution. But also, take Sanjay Jha's word for it that apparently my thinking is mired in the past.
Well, mine's apparently mired in the past too, because it just kind of makes sense to me. Any last final thoughts, Paula? Just got about 20, 30 seconds here.
No, I would just say that it's an ongoing process that we have to keep close eye on, and no one really knows what the final outcome is is going to be on this front and in terms of the impact on
We can just hope that there's like the metaverse and AI everywhere, and like we just need a million chips everywhere. I don't know. It's a very interesting time that we're living in. Paula, thank you so much. Paula Pencal, she's semiconductors analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence here in studio, Interactive Broker Studio. Ian King, our thanks always, our go-to when it comes to all things global chips, U.S. semiconductor and networking reporter at Bloomberg News.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 4:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long at Bloomberg. We begin with a headline from the Bloomberg Professional Service, and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says it is now, quote, highly likely that cash will run out by early June. This as stocks fluctuate ahead of that crucial meeting between President Biden and Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy to iron out roadblocks in debt ceiling negotiations. S&P little change today, eking out a gain of just half a point at 4192. The Dow down 140, down 0.4%. NASDAQ up 62, higher by 0.5%. Stay with Bloomberg for the latest on the debt ceiling negotiations. 10-year yield yield, 3.71%. We have got the 2-year, 4.32%. Gold right now, 1972 the ounce, down 0.3%. West Texas Intermediate crude, 71.99 a barrel. Crude up today by just about 0.6%. Zoom video communication shares higher after hours by 4.7%. Zoom has raised its full-year sales forecast in a positive sign for the software maker's effort to continue growing in a post-pandemic world. Again, Zoom video communication shares after hours up now by 4.3%. Recapping stocks end of the day mixed, S&P up by 0.5 point. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm just going to say, Charlie, it's a good thing Matt's not in studio because he would go crazy on like, why do people keep Zooming? Like, let's have a conversation with one another.
Indeed. And remember when this? When this was the internet? When it was the darling of the pandemic era?
I know.
Absolutely.
I'm
incredible.
still Zooming a little bit. I'm just going to tell you.
Yeah, I've switched over to Zoom too. It's how I like to make a lot of the calls with friends when I need to catch up.
See? All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Talking Zoom, because we are seeing that stock move in the after hours pop after reporting its earnings and giving an update on the business. In the meantime, Jamie Dimon, he did some speaking. He actually wrapped up the company's investor day today. Shares of JP Morgan Chase that were all over the place. They were up 1.8% at their highs, down 1% at their lows. And as we mentioned, the biggest U.S. bank raising its guidance for net interest income this year, also talking about the business. And wrapping up the day was the CEO of JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, who talked a little bit about the rate environment. Here's what he had to say.
You're already seeing credit tightening up because, the easiest way for a bank to retain capital is not to make the next loan. So I think you are going to see that. And I think everyone should be prepared for rates going higher from here. That if 5% is not enough in Fed funds, and I've been advising this to clients and banks, you should be prepared for 6, 7.
He's talked about that before, 6%. Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, wrapping up the investor day at the company about an hour and a half ago. So let's get to it. She's had a long day, but she's been on it. Allison Williams is Senior Global Banks Analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence, joining us right now on the phone in New York City. Allison, thanks for jumping on with us. And highlights before Jamie spoke, because there were a lot of big names at JP Morgan that spoke, and highlights after Jamie spoke.
So, perhaps most interesting was we knew that succession was going to be a question coming into the day.
Yeah.
And that is largely in part to the news that we got from Morgan Stanley on Friday. And it was interesting that the day really kicked off with Daniel Pinto, who's considered widely the heir apparent to Jamie Dimon, as well as Jeremy Barnum, the CFO. And so hearing those two leaders speak and then hearing from all of the leaders from JP Morgan, they all have really strong stories to tell, strong market share positions, expenses. Is an area that was highlighted last year, so there were a lot of updates in terms of where the businesses came in on those expenses.
Can they do no wrong? Is that how it seems?
Well, I guess the two things that Jamie always points out are sort of Square and Stripe as things that they missed.
Yeah.
And he would say, or he actually did, blatantly say, he does try to look for things that they missed and things that they've done wrong. But I think that, take for example, last January of 2022, when they came out and said that they were going to have these huge expenses and people got all upset, and they basically talked about investing for the long term. So they can do things that people don't, or investors might not like in the short term, but I think the long-term way of thinking and the long-term investments that the firm has made just continue to pay off.
And Allison, as you know, this coming on the heels of that First Republic deal, and as Carol mentioned at the top of this, how JP Morgan did boost that net interest outlook. Can you kind of break down their outlook when it comes to the financials moving forward? Because I know they weren't quite as keen when it came to the trading and investment banking revenue.
So I would say two important things there. First, on First Republic, they did up the guide for the net interest income, but they also talked about the higher expenses. So $3 billion of net interest income to be added through First Republic. That was more granular disclosure, but they also talked about $3.5 billion in expenses. Assuming some restructuring built into that, it could be, a little bit better than the run rate of $500 million annualized net income that they talked about for the deal. And, we, as well as most investors, looked at that as pretty conservative at the time. And they did sort of confirm that is a conservative number. But, again, the net pretty small after you think about, all the moving parts there. On the trading line, what's interesting to us, obviously the 15% down is a disappointment. They said down 50% broadly, so fees, FICC trading, equity trading, consensus estimates going into today were more like 5% down for fees and trading. But what I thought was interesting was, the bank talking about sort of volatility and perhaps some of the disconnects between some of the risks out there and the valuations. And so, could we see some pickup in the second half from some of that volatility?
Hey, one of the things I thought was really wild, and I guess I think the whole world, we're kind of obsessed with what's going on in the private markets, and they did talk about plans, or at least playing up their plans to go deeper on private capital, especially private credit. And I just, how do you think about this, Allison, of like our banks digging deeper and deeper into kind of the private credit world?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, it's really the private credit and the non-banks of the world that have really gotten into the bank lending side of the business.
Right.
So when you look at credit assets over the last 20 years, you definitely have seen those sort of move away from the banks. And I think investors for a long time have seen that and had concerns about that. One of the interesting things that J.P. Morgan, Jamie Dimon himself specifically said was, he talked about SVB Financial and broadly, the firm talked about sort of looking at that business and sort of going after, some of the more, I think they were calling it sort of the innovative companies or innovative ecosystem that they called it. And then Jamie Dimon talked about how, once they dug in and saw how SVB really had covered those companies, it was really innovative and helped them learn like maybe why they hadn't made, more progress against it. And so I think that goes to, maybe his broader point before in the question that you asked at the top of our conversation, do they miss things? And I think that's what makes a good investor. That's what makes a good manager is, doing the postmortem and thinking about like what you can do better, looking to the future and what you can do better.
Are we seeing other big banks also talking about trading and investment banking revenue also declining as far as their outlooks for the rest of the year?
I think that, so on the trading and banking, if I heard you correctly, the trading and banking is negative for this quarter, but I think they did give perhaps some optimism around some of the activity in the second half. Of course, we'll have to see what happens with prices. We'll have to see what that means for businesses like asset and wealth management. Another statistic, it was interesting because we were looking at some of the flows in the first quarter and looking at the fact that J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and BlackRock are three asset and wealth managers that have seen positive flows this quarter, but also the last several years. And then J.P. Morgan sort of adding to that they've seen 19 years of net inflows. That's pretty impressive.
Well, I mean, did we really get anything new coming off of the recent quarterly update? Just got about 30, 40 seconds.
No, I mean, I feel like the J.P. Morgan, what's interesting about these days is it sort of gives you a lot of new ideas to look into for the businesses, because it is more just about sort of pulling back the curtain and looking at the different opportunities and looking at and thinking about, little parts of the business and how they can contribute to the whole. So, that was our initial takeaway. There was, not much change to the earnings outlook. You could say there's a little risk to 2Q, but of course we're only halfway through the quarter, so we'll see what happens there.
$84 billion from net interest income. Not too shabby, though. Allison Williams, thanks. I know it's been a long day, so thank you. Allison Williams, she's our senior global banks analyst at our Bloomberg Intelligence team, our in-house group of analysts tracking all the news out of JP Morgan. As we said, stock finishing the day just down about 0.8%, so just a little bit off its lows of the day and well off its highs. At its highs, it was up almost 1.8% today.
And to your point, when you're talking about the $84 billion number for that net interest income, the previous forecast was around $81 billion.
It's just either way, it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of
I'm just
money.
going to say. All right, everybody, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week. Let's get another check on world and national news. Back we go to our Bloomberg newsroom and Denise Pellegrini. Hey, Denise.
All right, thank you, Carol. President Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, as we've been reporting, will be meeting to talk about raising the debt ceiling, and McCarthy is not tipping his hand about what might go down at those 5:30 p.m. Wall Street time talks, but he does say he does think he has the support of his party.
I firmly believe what we're negotiating right now, majority of Republicans will see that it is a right place to put us on a right path.
Okay, so that's McCarthy. President Biden, meantime, says he wants to focus in part on raising revenue by making sure everyone pays their fair share of taxes.
We are willing to cut spending as well as raise revenue so people start paying their fair share.
And as I mentioned, that meeting at 5:30, we'll be tracking all those breaking developments on this day for you here on Bloomberg Radio. Former President Donald Trump campaigned, you probably remember, on that promise to, quote, lock her up when it came to Hillary Clinton. Well, now we're getting an idea of just how serious he might have been about that. Bloomberg's Nathan Hager explains.
The Justice Department kept its investigation into Hillary Clinton's family foundation open for nearly all of Trump's presidency. That's according to documents obtained by the New York Times under the Freedom of Information Act, as well as interviews with former DOJ officials. The probe centered on the foundation's dealings with foreign donors while Clinton served as Secretary of State under then-President Barack Obama. The documents show prosecutors closed the case without filing charges just days before then-President Donald Trump left office. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
Thank you, Nathan. And we turn now to how much it costs to get around New York City. Subway and bus fares set to rise to $2.90 in August. It's about $2.75 now. MTA may also boost Easy Pass bridge and tunnel tolls by as much as 7%. Who says there's no inflation? Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 4:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long at Bloomberg. Zoom video communication shares now a little changed after hours, up by about 0.6%. We did see the stock rally by just about 5%, but right now we've got Zoom up by 0.4%. Zoom Video Communications is raising its full-year sales forecast, and a positive sign for the software maker's effort to continue growing in a post-pandemic world. Turned out to be a mixed day for the U.S. stock market, with the S&P eking out a gain of 0.5 point. Stocks spent much of the session fluctuating ahead of a crucial meeting between President Biden and Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy to iron out roadblocks in their debt ceiling negotiations. Again, the S&P up by 0.5 point. The Dow was down 140 points today, down by 0.4%. NASDAQ up 62. That was a gain of 0.5%. 10-year yield, 3.71%. The 2-year, 4.31%. Spot gold down $5 the ounce to $19.71. Drop there of 0.3%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.6%, $71.99 a barrel. Well, NASDAQ this year is up by 21.5%, but Max Wasserman, the founder of Miramar Capital, speaking on Bloomberg Business Week, said you got to keep those gains in perspective.
If you look back into NVIDIA and some of these techs, all these companies just made a retrenchment to where they were trading a year ago. So it's not like these are making ultimate new highs by a tremendous amount. I mean, they're making some new highs like Microsoft, but it's not by a significant amount. So what we're saying to people, for new money, be cautious jumping into the NASDAQ.
He mentioned NVIDIA down 0.3%, Microsoft up 0.9%. And that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You're listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week on this Monday. I'm Carol Massar along with Jess Metton. So the aviation sector really set to thrive in 2023. You're just back from a trip.
Just back from Aruba. Did not check bags because I'm always afraid I'm going to lose my bag.
You're helping set up the next segment. So let's get to it with Sherry Stein. She's Chief Technology Officer of the Americas at SITA. They are the IT provider for global aviation. They work at airports, onboard planes, at borders. They operate in more than 200 countries, which may explain why we find her on this Monday on Zoom in Spain. Sherry, nice to have you here on Bloomberg. Talk to us a little bit about this organization, the history. It's been around for a long time. So just talk a little bit about the mission, if you will.
Sure, that's right. Hey, Carol. Hey, Jess. Hi. Nice to be here with you. So SITA was formed in 1949 really to help bring the communications together between airlines, aircraft, and the airports so that, they could easily know when an aircraft was leaving one airport and when it was expected to arrive at the next. And so to help facilitate that air-to-ground communications. So we were formed on that basis and have been operating ever since. So we serve more than...
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Your members are like global, correct, nowadays?
That's right. Yeah, we're a cooperative organization with about 450 different members, airlines, airports around the world. So any airport that you go into, about 95% of the world's airports, just look for that powered by SITA sticker on any of the computer equipment or kiosks or boarding gates or any of the devices that you see there. And then, of course, the network behind the scenes that you won't see is part of what helps keep that all working.
So Sherry, talk to us about these different innovative solutions that y'all are trying to roll out here that are already basically at a number of different airports to basically try to help travelers.
Yeah, so a big focus is on digitization and how to help eliminate the manual and paper-laden processes that have plagued not only our industry, but other industries, right? Is how to move to a more seamless or frictionless process. So we do a lot of work around, biometrics for document validation, and then certainly the subject that you were talking about earlier, Jess, with your flight to Aruba, includes not only work with biometrics and and digital identity, but also around bag tracking and bag management and helping to make that whole process more seamless and easier for people to give that confidence to check their bags.
No, I have to say, I'm putting little Apple tags in my luggage so that I can kind of track it. But I'm also noticing that more and more airlines are saying, hey, you checked your bags, here's where they are. And they're giving you some information. I'm assuming you are involved in that.
That's right, exactly. So our platform suite is World Tracer is the brand name. Passengers might not know it because we're more of a B2B. We provide services to the airlines and to the airports behind the scenes. But anything to do with the bag messaging, when you get the notification that your bag has been checked in, that your bag has been put onto the plane, that your bag is arriving at Carousel 3 at your destination, that's all messaging powered by our platform. So it helps boost that confidence and provide the digitization for the automation of those processes to help keep passengers informed and reduce some of the stress levels and anxiety, because nobody wants that when they travel.
Well,
right?
especially since we're being asked to do more and more at the plane, like in check-in and stuff. There's a lot that's being kind of put on us. Like, how much did you do? Did you check in yourself? Did you take the bag over?
I did everything.
Yeah, exactly.
I did everything. That's why I was worried. I've had lost baggage in the past, and I just didn't want to go through it again. I was curious because I know that you did a baggage IT insight study, and not surprisingly, you had on there that the number of mishandled baggage nearly doubled from 2021 to 2022. I mean, as far as other things when it comes to delayed baggage or other forms that you're able to help people that are working through this, is it just for lost baggage, or what else can you do here as far as trying to help travelers kind of ease their travel burdens?
Yeah, so really when you look at kind of the end-to-end process, I suppose, right, there are more than 40 organizations involved in helping to fulfill a trip. So everything that we can do to provide more information, more data, more tools to help give the passenger more information, feel in control. Because I think the biggest thing about travel is maybe feeling, that you don't have control. You don't have access to information. You don't have always accurate information. So everything that we can do to help make that possible is really core to our mission. So, the bag tracking details, certainly being able to provide accurate flight information and making sure that you get that single source of truth. So you have consistent information regardless of, whether you're looking at the screen in the airport, the app on your phone, or calling the reservation center, that everybody has the same information about that flight or about your bag.
Can I ask
and all of those things are
this ability to track your bag, though, if there's a delay, I mean, how is it kind of helping to make sure that indeed, like if you're sitting on the plane and then you realize, okay, my bag didn't get there, that's going to just stress the heck out of me, rather than not knowing until I get to the carousel. So I do wonder, I guess ultimately it's not just about like telling you information, but hoping that it isn't delayed, it isn't lost. So I'm curious how it's all of this digitization and the work that you guys are doing with airports and airlines, how is it improving so log bags aren't delayed, aren't lost, aren't damaged?
Yeah, so a couple of cases, I suppose, like with Lufthansa, we've been working on this auto reflight system where if a bag happens to miss a connection because maybe it's a tight timeline or, flight was delayed for some reason, we have an auto reflight now. So it puts the bag automatically onto the next flight and then just without having to retag the bag, without having to require manual intervention. And so that's bringing fantastic savings for Lufthansa, and so leading to the rollout of that system on a wider basis beyond a proof of concept. And then airlines like LATAM are seeing like a 40% increase in customer satisfaction through the implementation of self-bag drop. And the systems that they're doing there, because now they reduce the burden of the manual tagging processes and they can automate all of that as well. So a lot of things in that type of approach that give the passenger control again and help to make it more automated.
Well, fun to check in with you. Certainly something we can all relate to. And it's interesting to kind of go behind the scenes and understand how it's all working. Sherry Stein is Chief Technology Officer of the Americas at CETA. joining us on Zoom from Spain. I do have to say that when I see the app tell me, hey, your bag's made it, I mean, I'll follow it.
Yeah.
And whew,
the tracking, it's such a relief.
It is, totally. All right, everybody, you're listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week, and this is Bloomberg Radio.
Your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We're keeping an eye on shares of Zoom Video Communications after hours, up now by 1.8%. Zoom raised its full-year sales forecast in a positive sign for the software maker's effort to continue growing in a post-pandemic world. Again, after hours, Zoom shares up now by 1.7%. Chevron CEO Mike Wirth says he is open to more deals after agreeing to buy PDC Energy for $6.3 billion, but will stay disciplined on price. Oil and gas producers are flush with cash after raking in record profits over the past year, leaving the energy patch ripe for a takeover boom. Shares of PDC Energy, they were up today by 7.2%. Chevron down 1.8%. Ford expects auto prices to fall by more than 5% this year and next. And in an interview this morning with Bloomberg Radio, Ford CEO Jim Farley also spoke about cost reductions at the automaker.
You're going to see from Ford over many years a natural reduction, not through attrition, but skill mismatch intentional transition of our teams, moving some of the engineering to lower cost labor sources. So it'll be a combination of things, but you know, it's obvious that we have to be more efficient.
And today we did see Ford shares down by 0.2%. And those are some of the company stories we're following for you at this hour. I'm Charlie Pellet. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week on this Monday. Carol Masser, along with Jess Met, and Tim is on leave still. We're going to talk a little bit more about what's going on, certainly out of D.C. We'll get to that a little bit later on. In the meantime, let's, on that, get a check on world and national news. Over to Denise Pellegrini. She's in our New York newsroom. Hey, Denise.
Hey, Carol, thank you. It is just about a half an hour now until President Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, as we've been reporting, meeting to talk about raising the debt ceiling. McCarthy not tipping his hand about what might go down at those talks, but sounding at least a bit positive, or at least not too negative.
Better to have a deal sooner. I think we can get a deal tonight, we get a deal tomorrow, but you've got to get something done this week to be able to pass it.
Okay, so that's McCarthy talking about that June 1st deadline. And Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary, says it is now highly likely cash will run out by early June. President Biden says he wants to focus on raising revenue by making sure everyone pays their fair share of taxes. And as I mentioned, that meeting at 5:30, we'll be tracking all the breaking developments live for you here on Bloomberg Radio. South Carolina Senator Tim Scott announcing the launch of his 2024 presidential campaign at a rally in Charleston. And Scott describing the country under the Biden administration as a nation in retreat that's under attack.
They're attacking our American values, our schools, our economy, and our security. But not on my watch. Not on my watch.
And the Republican lawmaker going toe-to-toe with contenders like former President Donald Trump, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, and former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson. And it's not too often you hear of a pit bull being the victim. I'll give this a try, though. Here we go. After suffering hundreds of bee stings from what pest control experts called Africanized bees, a dog in the Los Angeles metro is recovering from the ordeal. Chance is a pit bull mastiff covered in stingers from head to toe after a neighbor unleashed thousands of bees while trying to remove the hives. Here's dog dad Brian Engen.
He was covered head to toe, everywhere, his tail, in his mouth, around his mouth, all over his head. Yeah, he got attacked really bad.
So Chance the pit bull's care has been very costly.
Yeah.
And the family set up a GoFund page to assist in covering the cost. Carol, if you guys want to toss something in.
That's good to know. I'm a lover of dogs. I'm sure Jess is too.
Of course.
And that's just like, oh,
I'm
man.
a dog person.
All right. Denise Pellegrini, thank you so much. All right, folks. A couple stories that are popping up on the most read on the Bloomberg. One is about, I think Denise might have touched on this, New York City subway and bus fares set to rise to $2.90 in August. This is up from $2.75. Yeah. I remember, was it $1 for a long time? It was like really inexpensive. It's getting expensive.
Especially
More
when you
expensive.
try to get those monthly passes. I mean, well over $100.
Gosh, I don't know. All right, so subway fares, bus fares here in New York City, they're going up. Going down, here's another story that's among our most read on the Bloomberg in the past 60 minutes. It's about an Aspen mansion that is, it hit the market for $100 million last year, slopeside mansion in Aspen, Colorado. A little bit of a bargain, closing for $65 million, according to listing agent Stephen Shane of Compass.
Yeah, seller
So
is
sale.
Detroit manufacturing entrepreneur and philanthropist Joel Tabor and his family, according to those records. So it's interesting just seeing the huge dynamic there, the asking $100 million, but then ended up selling for $65 million.
Yeah, 1.4 acres, three-story home built on the side of Aspen Mountain, originally built in 79, renovated in 2015, 14,200 square feet house.
Sounds pretty
10
amazing.
bedrooms, 2 kitchens, about 5,000 square feet, I bet, of deck and patio space, because if you're going to be in Aspen, you want to be outside.
Right. I mean, Colorado. I mean, it's... I can't even imagine being. It sounds like quite the.
Well, you missed a bargain there.
I did. I'm upset. Where was I?
It sold for $65 million. All right, folks, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week on this Monday. We are really just thinking about a lot, certainly as investors, as traders, thinking about the debt ceiling and negotiations in D.C. We're going to get an update. As we know, the President and Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, are expected to meet in this coming hour, probably just moments from now. You're listening and watching Bloomberg Radio.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
Hi, everybody. Bloomberg Business Week continuing on this Monday. I'm Carol Masser, along with Jess Metton. Tim Stenovec, as you know, is on leave. We're here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, streaming on YouTube and, of course, on Bloomberg Originals. Hey, coming up this hour, we're going to monitor, of course, the talks in D.C. to avert a catastrophic U.S. default. President Biden and Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy getting ready to meet at this hour. So they are expected to be sitting down either as we speak or very shortly.
And we're also going to get into MBAs and also something we've discussed a lot, Carol, when it comes to the gender pay gaps, as well as new AI employee alliance with the head of modern work and business applications at Microsoft 365.
Right. MBAs, it's really interesting. People, men, women, they start out of the gate. In terms of salaries, they seem pretty much on par, but as it goes along in terms of up the scale and along their careers, we see some incredible gaps created. So we're going to get into all of that in just a moment. First up, though, another check on our top business stories. Once again, here is Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. Developing story after ours. Headline on the Bloomberg Professional Service and the broadcasting business. Tegna says that merger with Standard General has been terminated. Also after ours, we heard from Zoom Video Communications. Stock is advancing. Right now, we've got Zoom up by 1.3%. It raised its full-year sales forecast. Turned out to be a down day today for the Dow. It fell 100.